My husband sat across the polished mahogany mediation table and casually adjusted the silver band of his Rolex. The faint metallic click echoed in the quiet room. It was a subtle flex of his wrist, the kind of movement a man makes when he believes he holds all the winning cards. A thin, self-assured smirk played on his lips as he glanced sideways at his overpriced lawyer. Nathan leaned back in his heavy leather chair, the picture of a corporate executive who had spent his entire career convincing people to buy into his carefully crafted illusions. He was confident I was about to walk away from a 14-year marriage with nothing, stripped down to whatever financial scraps he deemed appropriate to leave behind. He thought he had orchestrated the ultimate domestic betrayal, legally suffocating me while he protected a hidden real estate empire he built using my own paycheck. He expected tears today. He expected me to beg for the house, to plead for a fair settlement. He thought my silence was the silence of a defeated woman. What he did not know was that I had spent the last 3 weeks auditing his entire existence, and I brought the receipts. Every stolen dollar, every forged signature, every lie. "You should take the settlement," Morgan Nathan said, his voice dropping into that low, patronizing tone he reserved for difficult clients. "It is more than generous considering the circumstances." The circumstances. That was his sanitized corporate term for the fact that he had secretly leveraged my family inheritance to buy a luxury beachfront condo for his mother. I looked at his hands resting on the table. The same hands that used to hold mine in the dark, now gripping a platinum pen ready to sign away my future. He tapped the pen twice against the wood, a nervous habit disguised as impatience. He wanted this over quickly. He needed this over quickly before his auto manufacturing board discovered what he had done. I let the silence stretch, watching a bead of sweat form at his hairline, despite the chilled air conditioning of the conference room. He thought I was hesitating out of fear. He did not realize I was simply enjoying the last few seconds of his false reality. My name is Morgan Alvarez. I am 42 years old. Today, I sat in a downtown Nashville high-rise, keeping my breathing slow and steady, holding a single manila folder in my lap. I was just waiting for the perfect moment to drop a forensic anvil on a man who thought I was just an obedient, unquestioning wife. If you have ever been told you are overreacting by a man who was secretly destroying your life behind your back, drop your age in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to Emily Told Stories. You will not want to miss how this trap snaps shut. To understand how a marriage decays into a boardroom ambush, we have to rewind 14 years to the day we stood at an altar in downtown Nashville. I work as a healthcare logistics auditor for a major hospital network in Tennessee. My entire career revolves around catching discrepancies in supply chain contracts. I spend my days staring at spreadsheets, tracking phantom shipments of surgical equipment, hunting down missing decimal points, and exposing vendors who think they can slide unauthorized fees past my desk. My professional eyes are trained to be sharp, unforgiving, and exact. Yet when I walked through the front door of our home every evening, I left that precision in my car. I treated my marriage to Nathan as a sacred sanctuary, a separate universe where paperwork did not require an audit. Nathan was a high-climbing executive in the auto manufacturing sector. His world was sleek, fast, and built heavily on optics. He thrived on the appearance of wealth, leaning into a flashy, shifting sand lifestyle of leased luxury cars, imported Italian suits, and corner office politics. He charmed everyone he met, possessing that specific brand of corporate charisma that makes people want to hand over their money just to be near his orbit. I thought his ambition was a sign of a strong provider. I thought we balanced each other. I was the steady earth, and he was the wind pushing us forward. I had deep roots in this state. Long before I met Nathan, my grandfather and I sat on a weathered wooden porch in the misty Great Smoky Mountains. The air up there always smelled of damp pine and wood smoke. He handed me the deed to our ancestral land, his rough, calloused hands resting over mine. "This is your gravity, Morgan," he told me, his voice rasping like dry leaves. "Never let anyone uproot you." That terrain was wild, ancient, and solid. It belonged to me, and it grounded my identity. It stood in stark contrast to Nathan and his polished, superficial ambitions that required constant feeding. Over the years, Nathan took control of our joint investments. He argued that his financial literacy was higher than his network gave us access to better portfolios. Our routine became a well-rehearsed dance. Every few months, usually on a Sunday evening, he would stand at our granite kitchen island. He would slide a neat stack of documents across the cool stone and tap the bottom line with the tip of his heavy gold pen. "Just sign, Morgan," he would say, his tone casual, brushing past any potential inquiries. "Do not worry about the fine print. I have got it handled." And because he was my husband, because I believed a partnership meant trusting the person sleeping next to you, I always did. I took the gold pen, scribbled my name on the dotted line, and went back to cooking dinner or reading my book. I never flipped the page. I never looked at the interest rates, the collateral clauses, or the transfer destinations. I was a professional auditor who never audited her own life. That blind trust was the foundation he used to quietly build a cage around me. The pattern remained unbroken until a suffocatingly humid Tuesday evening in late July. The Tennessee summer heat was pressing thick and heavy against the living room windows. The air conditioner hummed a steady, straining rhythm. Nathan walked through the front door an hour later than usual. He did not offer his customary greeting. He did not ask about my day. His jaw was set tight, a hard line of tension pulling at the corners of his mouth. He loosened his silk tie with a sharp, irritated yank and dropped his leather briefcase onto the floor. He walked directly to the kitchen island and pulled a thick manila envelope from his jacket. The slap of the paper against the granite echoed in the quiet kitchen. He pushed it toward me. "Just a standard tax restructuring form for the joint accounts," he said. The words came out too fast. His breathing was shallow. "Sign the back page so I can get it to the accountant tomorrow morning." He set his gold pen on top of the envelope. I reached for it, muscle memory guiding my hand, but as my fingers brushed the cool metal of the pen, I paused. There was a raw, defensive sharpness in his voice, a frantic edge that had never been there before. He was shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes darting toward the hallway rather than meeting my gaze. My logistics training, dormant in this house for 14 years, suddenly sparked to life. A subtle alarm bell rang in the back of my mind. The blind trust I had worn for so long suddenly felt very heavy, like a smothering blanket. I pulled my hand back from the pen. I looked at the envelope. It was far too thick to be a simple tax restructuring form. The edges of the paper peeked out crisp and dense with legal text. I looked up at his tight, impatient expression. The man I had loved for over a decade looked less like a husband asking for a favor and more like a cornered salesman trying to close a desperate deal. "I am exhausted, Nathan," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. "My head is pounding from looking at screens all day. I will read through it in the morning and sign it over coffee." His reaction was immediate and startling. He slammed his hand flat against the counter, the sound cracking like a whip. "There is nothing to read, Morgan," he snapped, his voice rising in pitch. "It is routine boilerplate paperwork. Why are you suddenly acting so paranoid? Just sign the damn paper so I can do my job and protect our assets." His sudden hostility was the final confirmation I needed. The man who always charmed his way through life was resorting to sharp intimidation over a simple request for time. He was trying to bully me into submission, relying on 14 years of my passive compliance to push this through. I picked up my mug of herbal tea, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. I maintained eye contact, letting a slow, deliberate second pass between us. "I am not being paranoid," I replied softly. "I am being thorough. I will look at it tomorrow." Nathan stared at me, his chest heaving slightly. For a fraction of a second, I saw raw panic flicker behind his eyes before it was buried under a mask of arrogant disdain. He scoffed, a bitter, dismissive sound. He turned on his heel and stormed up the wooden stairs, his heavy footsteps thudding against the floorboards until the bedroom door clicked shut. I stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the silence settle back over the house. The thick manila envelope sat on the granite island, daring me to open it. I picked it up, feeling the substantial weight of the paper. I did not take it to the bedroom. I carried the folder into my small home office down the hall. I closed the door behind me and turned the lock, the metallic click sounding like the chamber of a loaded gun. I sat down at my desk, turned on the bright fluorescent reading lamp, and opened the envelope. Tonight, I would not just sign. Tonight, I was going to read every single word. The brass lock of my home office door engaged with a sharp, firm click. I stood in the center of the room for a long moment, listening to the muffled thud of Nathan walking heavily across the hardwood floors above me. The ceiling groaned under his weight as he retreated to the master bedroom. I waited until the overhead pipes shuddered, signaling he had turned on the master bath shower. He was washing off the tension of his failed intimidation tactic. I walked over to my desk, a heavy oak piece I had salvaged from an antique store during our first year of marriage, and I turned on the brass reading lamp. The bulb flickered briefly before casting a stark white pool of light across the leather blotter. I dropped the thick manila envelope right in the center of that light. My fingers hovered over the metal clasp. The familiar scent of fresh printer toner and stale office air wafted up from the paper. In my line of work dealing with hospital supply chains, a thick envelope usually meant a vendor was trying to hide an inflated margin inside hundreds of pages of useless addendums. You learn very quickly never to read a contract from the first page. You start at the back. You look for the schedules, the itemized exhibits, the collateral declarations. I slid the stack of documents out of the envelope and laid them flat. The logo at the top left corner belonged to a major national commercial bank, not our certified public accountant. My eyes bypassed the standard introductory jargon and darted straight to the bolded headers on page 4. The document was titled, Commercial Line of Credit Application. I traced my index finger across the top row, tracking the numbers typed into the primary request box. $450,000. The breath caught in my throat. We lived comfortably on 2 high incomes, but a near $500,000 commercial loan was staggering. I flipped rapidly to the 7th page, hunting for the security agreement. A loan of this size required substantial backing. Banks do not hand out that kind of capital based on a firm handshake and a tailored suit. They demand collateral. I found the collateral schedule listed on page 9. My vision narrowed, focusing on a specific sequence of numbers identifying a plot of real estate. I did not need to cross-reference the parcel identification number with county records. I had memorized those digits years ago. It was the exact parcel number belonging to the 40 acres of untamed timberland in the Great Smoky Mountains. My grandfather had purchased that land with decades of saved factory wages. It was the only piece of true wealth my family had ever known. The inheritance was solely mine, protected prior to our wedding, untouched by our joint accounts. A cold, hollow sensation bloomed behind my ribs. Nathan was not restructuring our taxes. He was attempting to leverage the only piece of the earth that truly belonged to me. He intended to use my gravity, my history, as a gambling chip for an undisclosed commercial venture. To do this, he would need my signature notarized and witnessed. He had pushed this envelope across the kitchen counter, demanding I sign it blindly, relying on 14 years of my trusting compliance to steal my inheritance right in front of my face. As I flipped the pages over to examine the signature line, a small square of thermal paper dislodged from the stack. It fluttered through the cone of the desk lamp and landed face down on the floor. I bent down and picked it up. It was a store receipt. The ink was fresh, the date stamped only 3 days prior. The merchant header read, Green Hills Fine Jewelry, a high-end boutique known for serving the Nashville elite. I scanned down to the purchased item. One 14-karat white gold diamond tennis bracelet. The total charge was $15,000, paid in full via a cashier check. The cliché hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. A secret $15,000 diamond bracelet tucked inside hidden financial documents. For a sickening, agonizing moment, the narrative seemed painfully obvious. He was having an affair. The late nights at the office, the sudden defensive posturing, the urgent need for undisclosed capital. My mind instantly conjured the image of a younger woman, perhaps a junior logistics coordinator at his auto manufacturing firm, wearing a sparkling tennis bracelet paid for by the impending theft of my family land. My hands began to shake. The edges of the paper blurred. The betrayal tasted sharp and metallic on the back of my tongue. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the sudden sting of tears. I had been a loyal wife. I had compromised. I had supported his career climbs. I had hosted his tedious corporate dinners, and my reward was becoming a walking stereotype, the aging wife abandoned for a fresh face and a shiny piece of jewelry. But the tears never fell. Instead, a peculiar sensation washed over me, starting at the base of my neck and radiating downward. It was the same familiar, chilling, structural calm I relied on during a crisis at the hospital network. Whenever a critical shipment of surgical supplies vanished from the manifest, panic was useless. Emotion clouded the data. I opened my eyes. I am an auditor, I reminded myself. Auditors do not guess. Auditors follow the money. I smoothed the wrinkled receipt flat against the leather blotter and set it aside. I needed to see the rest of the puzzle before I decided what picture it formed. I turned back to the commercial loan documents, my vision clear, my pulse steadying into a slow, rhythmic beat. I needed to know what a $450,000 loan was supposed to fund. I found the itemized disbursement schedule on page 12. It outlined a comprehensive construction budget: lumber, concrete, pouring, electrical routing, plumbing, fixtures. Nathan was building something substantial from the ground up. I read down the list of materials line by line until a strange, highly specific detail snagged my attention. The budget allocated $28,000 for hurricane-grade impact window installations. I stopped reading. I stared at the words printed on the page. Hurricane-grade impact windows. A memory surfaced from a month prior. We were sitting at a highly rated Italian restaurant downtown. Nathan was swirling a glass of expensive red wine, complaining bitterly about supply chain delays. He told me he was sourcing reinforced industrial glass for a new auto manufacturing client. He spent 10 minutes lamenting how difficult it was to procure hurricane-grade materials due to port congestion. I had nodded sympathetically, offering my own logistical advice on alternate freight routes. I looked back at the document. The logic gap was glaring. It made zero sense for an auto manufacturing facility in landlocked Tennessee to require hurricane-grade impact windows. Those specific building materials are mandated by strict coastal building codes to withstand tropical force winds and flying debris. You do not install coastal defense windows on a factory floor in the middle of the Mississippi River Valley. The geographic mismatch unraveled the entire illusion. He was not building an auto facility. He was building a coastal property. A sudden, vivid image formed in my mind. Coastal property requires prime real estate. Prime real estate requires immense upfront capital. He needed the line of credit backed by my grandfather, pristine mountain acreage, to fund a luxury build on a distant coastline. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the camera application and turned off the flash. I stood up, leaning over the desk to avoid casting shadows on the paper. I photographed the first page. The soft digital click of the shutter sounded incredibly loud in the quiet room. I turned the page and took another photo. I moved with methodical precision, capturing every single paragraph, every financial declaration, every deliberate misrepresentation of our joint assets. I photographed the forged notary stamp he had already procured on the final page. As I reached the end of the stack, I looked back at the jewelry receipt resting near the lamp. The structural calm allowed me to view the diamond tennis bracelet through a new analytical lens. Nathan was a calculating man. He did not spend $15,000 on a whim for a fleeting romance. If he was hiding a substantial coastal property build and actively committing mortgage fraud to finance it, the bracelet was not a romantic gesture for a mistress. It was a calculated tool. You do not bribe a mistress with a tennis bracelet when you are hiding $500,000 in fraudulent loans. You bribe someone who has the power to expose you. You bribe an accomplice. The recipient of that jewelry was someone who knew exactly what Nathan was doing. Someone much closer to home. Someone whose silence needed to be purchased with 14 carats of white gold. I finished photographing the final page of the loan document. I carefully gathered the thick stack of papers, tapping the bottom edges against the desk to align them perfectly. I slipped the jewelry receipt back between pages 8 and 9, exactly where I had found it. I placed the entire stack back inside the manila envelope and sealed the metal clasp. I had captured the data. Now I needed to test the suspect. I turned off the brass desk lamp, plunging the office into darkness. I walked out into the hallway, feeling the cool air against my face. I was ready for breakfast. The Tennessee morning sun broke through the tall kitchen windows at exactly 6:45. Bright golden light spilled across the polished white granite countertops, catching dust motes dancing in the chilled air conditioning. I had not slept a single minute. Instead, I spent the dark hours locked in my home office, meticulously cataloging the digital photographs I captured, uploading the evidence of his fraud to a secure, encrypted cloud server. Now I sat on one of the high-backed leather stools at the center island, wrapping both hands around a ceramic mug of pitch-black coffee. The bitter heat radiating through the ceramic grounded me, keeping my focus razor-sharp. I wore my usual hospital identification badge, clipped to a crisp navy blouse, projecting the flawless image of a woman ready for an ordinary workday at the healthcare network. The thick manila envelope rested flat on the cool stone surface, sitting mere inches from my mug, like an unexploded bomb. At precisely 7 o'clock, the heavy, deliberate tread of Nathan descending the wooden staircase vibrated through the floorboards. He walked into the kitchen, radiating his usual impenetrable corporate armor. He wore a sharp charcoal suit tailored specifically to his broad shoulders, paired with a silk tie the color of crushed blueberries. The crisp scent of his imported bergamot cologne preceded him, a fragrance engineered to announce his authority before he even entered a room. He moved with the brisk, entitled efficiency of a high-level auto manufacturing executive who expects the world to pave the road ahead of his polished leather Oxfords. He did not look at me. His focus remained entirely on the high-end espresso machine, humming quietly in the corner. He reached into the overhead frosted glass cabinet, pulled down his favorite insulated travel thermos, and positioned it under the silver spout. Only after pressing the brewing button did he turn his head toward the island. His eyes landed immediately on the manila envelope. A tight, satisfied expression smoothed out the lingering irritation that had plagued him the night before. He assumed my presence at the counter alongside the paperwork meant I had capitulated to his demands. In his mind, the natural order of his universe had been seamlessly restored. He walked over the hard heels of his shoes, clicking sharply against the ceramic tile floor, and reached his right hand out across the granite. Finally, he muttered, his tone clipped and impatient, ready to snatch the prize. I placed my fingertips on the top edge of the folder and slid it slowly backward, stopping just out of his reach. "No," I replied, keeping my voice remarkably smooth and dangerously even. He paused, his thick brow furrowed as his brain struggled to process the single syllable of defiance. He slowly withdrew his hand, his gaze shifting from the brown envelope to my face. He picked up his filled thermos from the espresso drip tray, unscrewed the lid to let the trapped steam escape, and raised the rim toward his mouth. "I have one question," I said. The kitchen grew so quiet I could hear the faint, rhythmic ticking of the wall clock near the walk-in pantry. Nathan exhaled a breath of manufactured exhaustion, indulging me the way a tired parent humors a persistent child. "Ask it fast, Morgan. I have an 8:30 quarterly strategy meeting downtown, and traffic on Interstate 65 is already backing up." I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms against the cool stone, holding his gaze without blinking. "Why does a routine tax restructuring form require my grandfather historic property to secure a $500,000 commercial loan for a corporate entity I do not own?" The world seemed to halt on its axis for a fraction of a second. Nathan, raised thermos, froze mid-air, hovering mere inches from his lips. The rising steam curled around his sharp jawline, but his facial features locked into a sudden, terrifying paralysis. I watched the healthy, confident flush of color rapidly drain from his cheeks, leaving behind a pale, ashen mask of pure shock. For a man whose entire lucrative livelihood depended on controlling narratives, dominating boardrooms, and projecting unflappable confidence, the brutal exposure struck him like a physical blow to the chest. He blinked twice. His pupils dilated as his brain scrambled to comprehend how the obedient, unquestioning wife had bypassed his sticky notes to read the actual binding contract. The initial shock evaporated in an instant, quickly replaced by a dark, defensive flush creeping up his neck. His jaw clenched tight enough to grind the enamel off his teeth. He slammed the thermos down onto the counter. The harsh impact sent a dark wave of hot espresso sloshing over the brim, pooling onto the pristine white granite and dripping down the face of the custom wooden cabinetry. He did not even glance at the spreading mess. "You have no idea what you are reading," he snapped, his voice dropping into a harsh, condescending octave designed to intimidate. His hands gripped the edge of the island, his knuckles turning stark white under the tension. "You are looking at isolated financial jargon and jumping to hysterical, uneducated conclusions. It is a sophisticated corporate tax loop, Morgan. I am using the land valuation to prove asset depth to the bank underwriters. It drops our overall interest rates across the entire portfolio. The lending institution just needs to see liquid stability on paper. They are never actually going to touch the mountain deed." I sat perfectly still, observing his desperate performance. It was a masterful display of manipulation refined by years of corporate negotiations. He wove complex financial terminology together to create a dense, intimidating wall of sound, hoping I would back down to avoid feeling intellectually inferior. He was actively weaponizing his executive pedigree to shrink my healthcare logistics background into something small, domestic, and insignificant. 10 years ago, the sharp sting of his belittling tone might have caused me to fold. 5 years ago, I might have apologized for invading his professional territory and doubting his intentions. Today, I simply watched the spilled coffee slowly inching toward the edge of the manila envelope. I did not move to wipe it up. I let the dark stain spread. Asset depth, I repeated slowly, testing the hollow, fabricated phrase on my tongue. You require my ancestral mountain acreage to prove asset depth for a commercial construction budget that specifically itemizes coastal building materials. That is truly fascinating accounting, Nathan. His eyes narrowed into dangerous, calculating slits. He realized the standard gaslighting tactics were failing. He realized I had read far past the deceptive headers, digging deep into the itemized disbursement schedules that exposed his lie. The air between us turned toxic, heavy with unspoken threats and fracturing trust. "We are doing this," he demanded, pointing a rigid, shaking finger at the folder. "You are going to sign that document right now so I can secure the financial future of this family." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, savoring the bitter, grounding taste. "No, I will not," I said, my volume never rising above a conversational hum. "I am not signing away my gravity so you can fund your secret illusions." He stared at me, his chest heaving with contained, furious energy. The harsh realization that he could no longer command my blind compliance broke whatever thin restraint he possessed. He let out a sharp, guttural sound of pure disgust. He snatched his suit jacket off the back of the dining chair, ignoring the spilled espresso staining the expensive counter. "You are going to regret this, Morgan." He threw the warning over his shoulder as he marched toward the garage access door. "You are making a terrible mistake over something you do not even possess the capacity to understand." The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind him, with enough force to rattle the framed pictures hanging in the hallway. Seconds later, the deep roar of his imported sports car engine echoed through the drywall, followed by the high-pitched screech of tires tearing out of our suburban driveway. I remained seated at the island, letting the sudden return of profound quiet wash over me. I looked down at the granite surface. Amidst the dark puddle of spilled coffee lay his expensive gold pen. He had brought it downstairs to witness my signature, and in his blind, panicked retreat he had left his favored tool behind. I picked it up, taking a napkin to wipe a stray drop of espresso from the gleaming metal barrel. The instrument felt heavy and cold in my palm. I walked over to the small kitchen desk, opened the top drawer, and placed the gold pen carefully beside my spare car keys. I closed the drawer with a soft, final click. He thought my refusal was a temporary roadblock, a brief bout of stubbornness he could overcome with enough strategic pressure later tonight. He was entirely unaware that I had just declared an unwinnable war. I grabbed a fresh paper towel to finally clean the spilled coffee, calculating my next logistical move when the silence was shattered by a sharp, demanding knock at the front door. I glanced at the digital clock on the oven display. It was not even 8 in the morning. Nobody arrived at a quiet Nashville home at this hour without an urgent agenda. I tossed the damp paper towel into the stainless steel sink and walked cautiously toward the foyer. Through the frosted glass panes of the entryway, I recognized the sharp, impatient silhouette of a woman who never bothered to knock twice. The battle had just expanded to the front lines, and the first enemy soldier had already deployed onto my porch. I pulled the brass handle backward, expecting to face my husband demanding his folder back. Instead, the heavy oak door swung open to reveal a private courier holding a meaningless corporate package. I signed for the small box, my pulse slowly returning to a steady rhythm, and locked the door once again. The true fallout did not stay contained between Nathan and me. He did not return home that evening, nor the next. He retreated to a luxury downtown hotel, attempting to use his absence as a form of psychological punishment. He assumed the silence would soften my resolve. It took exactly 48 hours for his panic to curdle into a new strategy. He decided to weaponize his family. 2 days later, a second, far more demanding knock rattled my front door. It was early Thursday afternoon. I had taken the rest of the week off from the healthcare network, using my accumulated personal leave to fortify my defenses. I opened the door to find my mother-in-law, Patricia, standing on the brick porch. She did not wait for an invitation. She pushed past my shoulder and stepped directly into the foyer, carrying an aura of suffocating entitlement that filled the space like an expensive, overbearing perfume. Patricia was a woman who had spent her entire adult life curating the pristine image of a wealthy Southern socialite. She wore tailored pastel blazers, pristine pearl necklaces, and styled her silver hair into an immovable helmet of perfection. Beneath that manicured exterior lay a fierce, transactional nature. She had raised Nathan to believe the world owed him its finest offerings, and she expected a significant return on that investment. I watched her heels click sharply against the hardwood floor as she marched into my living room, surveying my home with her usual thinly veiled disdain. She lowered herself onto the center of my ivory sofa, crossing her legs at the knee, arranging her silk skirt with practiced precision. She patted the space next to her, a condescending gesture, instructing me to sit. I remained standing, leaning casually against the doorframe of the parlor. I wanted her to feel the geographical disadvantage of being a guest in a house where she held no true authority. "Nathan called me last night," she began, her voice tight and clipped. "He is staying at a hotel, Morgan. My son is sleeping in a commercial bed because his own wife refuses to support his professional trajectory." I did not offer a defense. I let her voice hang in the quiet room, observing the way her fingers dug into the quilted leather of her designer handbag. Her knuckles were stark white. Nathan had clearly run to her the moment his intimidation tactics failed in the kitchen. He had spun a tailored narrative, painting himself as the ambitious provider and framing me as the hysterical, uncooperative spouse actively sabotaging his corporate career over a useless piece of dirt. "You need to understand how the real world operates," Patricia lectured, her tone dripping with rehearsed condescension. "Nathan has an opportunity to secure a monumental leap for his manufacturing firm. He requires liquid capital to finalize his expansion. You are sitting on a neglected patch of wild timberland that generates zero revenue. Holding up his progress over sentimental attachments is juvenile. Morgan family makes sacrifices. Nathan needs this capital. You are being incredibly selfish." I looked down at this woman sitting on my furniture, listening to her dismiss my grandfather legacy as a useless piece of dirt. The Smoky Mountain property was the only reason I possessed a financial safety net. It was the soil that anchored my identity. Realizing Nathan's financial entitlement was an inherited trait clarified so many shadows in our marriage. He learned to view other people as resources because his mother taught him how to extract value without remorse. Yet as I studied her face, my logistics training picked up on several glaring discrepancies. Patricia was projecting authority, but her physical micro-expressions betrayed a profound, frantic desperation. The expensive leather handbag she gripped so tightly was an older season, its strap slightly frayed at the seam. Her manicured nails were chipped near the cuticles. A thin sheen of nervous sweat glistened beneath her heavy foundation, despite the cool temperature of the living room.
A mother advocating for her son's career advancement might exhibit frustration or disappointment. She does not exhibit this level of existential terror. Patricia was vibrating with a hidden, high-stakes anxiety. The analytical gears in my mind began to turn, processing this new data point. Why was Patricia so deeply personally invested in a commercial line of credit meant for an auto manufacturing facility? If Nathan's business expanded, she gained bragging rights at her country club. But she was acting as if her actual survival depended on this specific loan clearing the bank. The calculation clicked into place, tipping me off to a profound plot twist. She was not just supporting her son. She had her own skin in the game. The rumored whispers I had heard years ago from her former neighbors suddenly carried vital weight. Patricia had lived far beyond her means since her husband passed. She was deeply in debt, swimming in a hidden ocean of unpaid liabilities. I would soon uncover that she was facing federal tax evasion charges, desperately needing a massive influx of untraceable cash to stay out of a federal courtroom. She was looking at my grandfather land as her personal bailout. I pushed off the doorframe and walked slowly toward the center of the room. I stopped just a few feet from where she sat. I did not raise my voice, nor did I cross my arms. I maintained the cool, structured posture of a woman reviewing a flawed ledger. "Family does make sacrifices, Patricia," I said, keeping my gaze locked onto her wavering eyes. "But my family land is not yours to sacrifice." The color vanished from her face. She opened her mouth, her jaw working silently as she searched for a counterattack that did not exist. I had stripped away her polite societal veneer, exposing the parasitic nature of her visit. She recognized the finality in my tone. The obedient, compliant daughter-in-law she thought she could bully had vanished, replaced by an immovable force she did not comprehend. "I am going to ask you to leave my home now," I instructed softly. Patricia scrambled to her feet, her composure fracturing into brittle shards of outrage. She hoisted her frayed designer bag onto her shoulder, her chest heaving with indignant fury. "You are making a ruinous mistake," she hissed, her voice trembling as she walked toward the foyer. "You have no idea the kind of pressure Nathan is under. You are an ungrateful, small-minded woman who does not deserve the life my son provides for you." I followed her to the front door, remaining entirely silent. I pulled the heavy oak door open, gesturing toward the sunlit porch. She stepped over the threshold, muttering a final string of bitter insults under her breath. I closed the door firmly behind her, the heavy latch securing the perimeter. I stood in the silent entryway, my mind racing with new implications. The pieces were beginning to connect, forming a terrifying, intricate picture. If Patricia was this deeply invested in securing a $450,000 commercial loan, the rot went far deeper than a simple business expansion or a solitary act of marital greed. Nathan was not acting alone. He was orchestrating a complex financial maneuver designed to rescue his mother from her own ruinous debts, utilizing my inherited assets as the sacrificial lamb. I needed to know exactly where the stolen money was destined to go. The itemized list of coastal building materials and hurricane impact windows still burned bright in my memory. The $15,000 diamond tennis bracelet was clearly a down payment on his mother's silence, a glittering bribe to keep their shared conspiracy intact. I could not just track the paper trail. I needed to track the people. Nathan had previously insisted we host a large family barbecue this coming weekend. He wanted to project the illusion of a perfect, unified household to a few visiting corporate colleagues. Before this morning, I had planned to cancel the event entirely. Now, I realized the gathering was the perfect tactical opportunity. His younger sister Lauren was flying in for the occasion. Lauren was notoriously careless, easily distracted,
and highly susceptible to letting secrets slip after a few glasses of white wine. I would play the dutiful, smiling hostess. I would serve the grilled steaks, pour the drinks, and wait for the enemy to reveal their next position. The Saturday afternoon arrived draped in a thick canopy of southern humidity. The air across our manicured suburban lawn smelled of burning hickory wood-charred meat and expensive imported cologne. Nathan insisted we host this backyard barbecue to project an unbroken facade of domestic bliss. He invited a select group of visiting auto manufacturing colleagues eager to display his perfect home, his perfect landscaping, and his perfectly compliant wife. He stood on the flagstone patio holding a pair of heavy stainless steel tongs, flipping thick ribeye steaks over the open flames of our oversized gas grill. He wore a crisp linen shirt rolled at the elbows, playing the role of the ultimate generous provider. I stood several yards away at the outdoor prep station, slicing heirloom tomatoes and arranging them onto a chilled ceramic platter, maintaining the structural calm of a seasoned operative in hostile territory. Nathan stepped away from the sizzling grill, pulling his smartphone from his pocket. He turned his back to the guests, seeking a moment of privacy, but the acoustic curve of the brick retaining wall carried his voice directly to my cutting board. He was speaking to his lawyer, or perhaps his mother. I heard a low, arrogant chuckle rumble from his chest. "Do not worry about Morgan," he murmured into the receiver, his tone dripping with dismissive confidence. "She is entirely clueless. She has always been compliant. Give her a few days to pout and she will sign whatever I put in front of her." It was a masterclass in dramatic irony. He stood there, laughing in the sun, drinking an imported lager, entirely unaware that the obedient woman slicing vegetables 10 feet away had already mapped the perimeter of his financial grave. The weak link in his carefully constructed chain arrived an hour later. His younger sister, Lauren, drifted through the sliding glass doors, clutching a sweating goblet of chilled Pinot Grigio. Lauren possessed a chaotic energy. She was notoriously irresponsible with capital, having bankrupted 2 boutique businesses, and remains perpetually reliant on her brother to fund her extravagant mistakes. She wore a flowing floral sundress and oversized designer sunglasses, masking the slight unsteadiness of her steps. She had clearly started drinking long before she arrived at our driveway. In the sterile environment of healthcare logistics, you learn that every complex system features a vulnerable point of failure. Lauren was a walking, talking, operational hazard, and she was carrying a full glass of wine. I picked up a crystal pitcher of iced water and moved toward the shaded lounge chairs where she had collapsed. I poured her a glass, offering a warm, hospitable smile that completely masked the calculating chill flowing through my veins. The afternoon sun beat down on the lawn as I sat in the adjacent wicker chair. I needed to extract data without triggering her defensive alarms. I started with polite pleasantries, complimenting her sundress, asking about her recent flight into Nashville. She offered vague, breathy responses, taking large, continuous swallows of her white wine. Once she was thoroughly disarmed, leaning back against the plush outdoor cushions, I pivoted the discussion toward her brother. "Nathan seems incredibly tense lately." I mentioned, casually keeping my voice light and conversational, as if discussing the weather. "I am honestly worried about his blood pressure. This auto manufacturing business expansion is putting an immense amount of stress on his shoulders. He is constantly reviewing construction budgets and material costs late into the night." Lauren let out a loud, ungraceful snort. She waved her wine glass dismissively, sloshing a few drops of pale liquid over the rim onto the pristine flagstone pavers. "Business expansion," she scoffed, rolling her eyes behind the dark lenses. "Please, do not let him play the martyr, Morgan. He is just stressed out about the closing costs on the Gulf Coast place. Mom is driving him to the brink, demanding imported Italian marble for the interior designs.
The ambient noise of the backyard faded into a dull, distant roar. The clinking of ice and crystal glasses, the booming laughter from the corporate colleagues, the sizzling fat hitting the hot charcoal, all vanished into a vacuum of silence. I stared at her, keeping my facial muscles entirely relaxed, despite the seismic shockwave tearing through my chest. "The Gulf Coast place," I prompted, my tone perfectly neutral, creating an inviting, unthreatening space for her to continue spilling her brother's secrets. "Yeah, the Florida vacation home," she slurred, leaning her head back against the cushions. She took another gulp of wine before her brain finally processed the words leaving her mouth. I watched the exact moment comprehension struck her. The flushed alcohol-induced color drained rapidly from her cheeks, leaving her skin a sickly pallid gray. She pulled her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose, her wide, panicked eyes locking onto mine. She realized instantly she had spoken out of turn, breaching a massive conspiracy I was never supposed to know existed. "Oh," she stammered, her voice suddenly thin and fragile, using all its previous bravado. "I thought he told you. I mean, it is just a small investment property." I did not press her further. I did not demand explanations or throw my glass across the patio. I simply smiled a cold, empty curve of the lips and stood up from the wicker chair. I told her I needed to check on the appetizers in the kitchen. As I walked away from the lounge area, the fragmented puzzle pieces snapped together in my mind with terrifying, undeniable clarity. The hurricane-grade impact windows listed in the secret construction budget. The sudden, frantic need for a $500,000 line of credit secured by my grandfather mountain acreage. The $15,000 diamond tennis bracelet hidden in the manila envelope. The bracelet was not a bribe to keep Patricia quiet about a legitimate commercial loan. It was a glittering distraction, a shiny reward for Patricia's participation in purchasing a luxury beachfront property using my stolen heritage. The sheer audacity of the scheme settled deep into my bones, freezing my blood into solid ice. Nathan was not expanding his corporate footprint. He was secretly mortgaging my ancestral land to buy a coastal vacation mansion for his mother and sister. He intended to strip mine the only true wealth my family possessed, leaving me liable for the crushing debt, while he handed the keys of a destined paradise to the very women who mocked me in my own living room. It was a deliberate, calculated extraction of my resources to fund their permanent vacation. I stepped inside the cool, air-conditioned kitchen, leaving the humid chaos of the barbecue behind. Through the window over the sink, I watched Nathan laughing with his colleagues flipping another steak, living in a fragile fantasy of total control. I watched Lauren scurrying toward the side gate, desperate to escape the fallout of her drunken confession, frantically dialing her phone to warn her mother. They thought they had outsmarted a naive wife. They did not understand that I now possessed the geographic target of their fraud: Florida. A luxury beach house. Tomorrow was Monday, and while Nathan drove downtown to his executive suite, I would not be reviewing hospital supply chains. I was going to deploy every logistical auditing tool at my disposal. I was going to hunt down every stolen dollar, unearth every hidden deed, and digitally dissect his offshore accounts until there was nothing left but the bare, undeniable truth. The time for observation was over. The hunt had officially begun. Monday morning brought a heavy and suffocating silence to the house. Nathan departed for his corporate suite at precisely 7:30, carrying his leather briefcase, wearing his usual armor of tailored wool and unchecked arrogance. He offered a tight and artificial smile before walking out the front door, likely believing the tense atmosphere from the weekend barbecue was slowly dissipating. He assumed I was upstairs, ironing my scrubs,
preparing for my standard shift at the hospital. He was wrong. I had already contacted the Healthcare Network Human Resources Department and requested an emergency week of personal leave. I did not confront him about Florida before he drove away. Confrontation is a tactical error employed by people who seek empty apologies or fleeting emotional validation. I wanted neither. I wanted a documented paper trail. I wanted undeniable evidence. I sat down at my personal desktop computer in the home office. I bypassed his devices entirely. I did not need to rely on a conveniently unlocked laptop or guess his passwords. My daily professional routine involved tracking pharmaceutical shipments across multiple state lines, uncovering phantom shell companies, and auditing complex vendor registries. I understood exactly how to navigate bureaucratic digital labyrinths. I opened the public portal for the Okaloosa County Property Appraiser in Florida. Destin is a specific enclave known for high-wealth real estate, making my search radius manageable. I filtered the public database cross-referencing recent residential property purchases exceeding $1 million with newly filed construction permits for hurricane-grade impact window installations. The search algorithm churned for less than 30 seconds before returning a single, glaring match. The property was a penthouse condominium situated directly on the white sands of the Gulf Coast. The listing details painted a picture of extravagant indulgence. 4 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a private wraparound terrace boasting panoramic ocean views, and custom imported Italian marble floors. The final sale price was recorded at $1.2 million. I stared at the digital photographs of the sunlit living room, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. While I was clipping coupons, driving a 6-year-old sedan, and carefully monitoring our grocery budget to build a secure future, my husband was financing a millionaire playground for his mother and sister. I scrolled down to the ownership history. The registered buyer was not Nathan. The buyer was listed as a corporate entity named Alvarez Holdings. A sharp breath escaped my lungs. He had weaponized my own surname. By incorporating the limited liability company under the name Alvarez, he created the perfect optical illusion. To any casual observer or any junior bank underwriter processing a loan, the entity appeared to be a standard family trust managed by his wife. It was a brilliant, deceptive shield. But public corporate registries require formal articles of incorporation, and those documents are accessible to anyone who knows where to look. I navigated to the Florida Division of Corporations website and pulled the annual filings for Alvarez Holdings. The document loaded onto my screen. I scanned past the registered agent details and locked onto the authorized managing members. My name was nowhere on the document. Nathan was absent as well. There was only one authorized signer possessing total operational control over the entity and its assets. Patricia. The intricate architecture of his fraud finally revealed itself in full scale. Patricia was drowning in debt and facing federal tax evasion penalties. If she purchased a luxury property under her own identity, the Internal Revenue Service would immediately place a lien on the condo and seize the asset. To bypass the federal government, Nathan created a ghost company using my family name to secure the financing, funneling the stolen capital into a safe harbor where his mother could enjoy the wealth untouched by her creditors. He was laundering money through our marriage to save his mother from federal prison. The gravity of the scheme required me to trace the exact origin of the funding. I needed to prove my sweat equity was the engine driving this criminal enterprise. I opened a new encrypted browser window and logged into our joint banking portal. I possessed years of meticulous pay stubs from the healthcare network. As a senior logistics auditor, I frequently earned substantial performance bonuses for identifying cost-saving measures and overhauling supply chains. I pulled 3 years of financial statements and began the tedious,
undeniable math. I started with December 2 years prior. I had worked grueling 60-hour weeks through the holiday season, managing critical ventilator distributions. The hospital rewarded me with a $12,000 bonus. I found the corresponding deposit in our joint account. 3 days after my bonus cleared, Nathan initiated a wire transfer for the exact same amount. The transaction description was vaguely labeled as an external portfolio index contribution. I cross-referenced the date and the amount with the public escrow deposits registered to Alvarez Holdings. It was a perfect, down-to-the-penny match. I moved to the next year. A summer performance bonus of $9,000. Within 48 hours, the funds vanished from the joint ledger disguised as a routine mutual fund transfer, only to reappear in the Florida property escrow account. Month after month, year after year, I tracked the systemic extraction of my labor. Every time I missed a family dinner to balance a hospital ledger, every time I stayed awake until 3 a.m. securing medical supplies, Nathan was quietly skimming the reward and handing it to his mother. He had drained hundreds of thousands of dollars of my personal income to build a real estate portfolio for a woman who viewed me with nothing but contempt. The bleeding was profound, far worse than the initial mountain land loan suggested. He had already stolen my past earnings, and now he was attempting to mortgage my grandfather's legacy to cover the final closing costs and luxury renovations. The cold structural calm guided my hands as I activated the laser printer sitting on the edge of my desk. I hit the print command on every single document. The machine whirred to life, the rhythmic mechanical hum filling the quiet office. I printed the Florida property deeds. I printed the Okaloosa County construction permits. I printed the articles of incorporation for Alvarez Holdings, featuring Patricia's signature. I printed 72 pages of highlighted bank statements, drawing thick red lines connecting my hospital bonuses directly to his fraudulent offshore wire transfers. The scent of hot toner permeated the air as the pages piled onto the output tray. I gathered the warm sheets of paper, aligning the edges with precise, methodical taps against the oak desk. I used a heavy-duty binder clip to secure the stack. It was a thick, undeniable dossier of financial fraud. It was a tangible weapon, constructed from the very paperwork he told me never to question. I set the heavy binder down next to my keyboard. The emotional sting of the betrayal had entirely evaporated, replaced by the calculating focus of an auditor preparing an execution protocol. I needed to secure my remaining liquid assets before taking the next tactical step. I reached for my mouse, intending to initiate a sweeping transfer of my current checking balance into the private credit union account I had opened a few days prior. I clicked the refresh button on the joint banking portal to verify the current routing numbers. The screen flickered. The familiar dashboard of our shared finances disappeared, replaced by a stark white page featuring a prominent red error icon. Your session has expired, the automated text read. Please enter your updated credentials. I typed in the password we had used for 14 years. I hit the enter key. The red icon flashed again. Access denied. Incorrect password or username. I tried a variation thinking I had made a simple keystroke error. Access denied. A sudden sharp ping echoed from my smartphone resting on the desk. I picked it up and opened my email application. An automated security alert from the bank sat at the top of my inbox. The message confirmed that the primary account holder had successfully changed the login credentials, altered the security authentication questions, and restricted secondary user access. Nathan had sensed the shifting dynamic over the weekend. He knew the compliant wife was waking up, and he was not going to wait for me to ask any more questions about tax restructuring forms. He was proactively tightening the noose.
He was initiating a total financial blackout, attempting to starve me into submission before I could realize the true depth of his crimes. He thought cutting off my access to the capital would leave me paralyzed and desperate. He had no idea the dossier sitting on my desk was already heavy enough to sink his entire world. The blinking red error message on the banking portal felt less like a technical glitch and more like the heavy slam of a steel prison door. Access denied. I sat in the quiet glow of the computer monitor, watching those two words radiate a harsh, unforgiving light across my home office. Nathan had sensed the subtle shift in my demeanor over the weekend. He recognized that the obedient, compliant wife who signed documents without asking questions had vanished, replaced by a woman who demanded clarity. In his rigid corporate mindset, resistance required immediate punishment. He was initiating a classic financial freeze-out, a brutal starvation tactic designed to force my swift submission. In the competitive sector of auto manufacturing, executives like Nathan do not negotiate with uncooperative suppliers. When a vendor refuses to lower their margins, men of his caliber simply sever the supply chain. They freeze incoming payments, restrict communication, and wait for the smaller company to bleed capital until sheer panic compels them to surrender. He was currently deploying that exact boardroom ruthlessness against his own marriage. He intended to cut off my oxygen and watch me gasp. The digital lockout was only the first perimeter of his siege. I pushed my chair away from the desk, navigating the silent hallway toward the front door. The humid Tennessee afternoon heat hit my face the moment I stepped onto the porch. I walked down the brick pathway to our curbside mailbox. Usually, the metal box overflowed with utility bills, credit card statements, and promotional flyers. I pulled the latch downward. The hollow metallic echo confirmed my suspicion. The interior was entirely empty. Not a single envelope rested on the corrugated tin floor. I closed the mailbox, the metal squeaking softly on its hinges. Nathan had intercepted the mail delivery. He was systematically gathering every piece of our shared physical documentation, hoarding the bank statements, the tax notifications, and the investment summaries. He was building a wall of silence, assuming that if I could not see the numbers, I could not track the theft. He wanted me blind, dependent, and isolated. That evening, the atmosphere in the dining room hung thick and heavy, charged with unspoken hostilities. Nathan had returned from his luxury downtown hotel carrying his leather briefcase and an air of manufactured casualness. He poured himself a glass of expensive Cabernet Sauvignon, the dark ruby liquid swirling in the crystal bowl. He had grilled steaks, presenting a charred ribeye on my porcelain plate, attempting to play the role of the providing husband while secretly orchestrating my financial ruin. We sat at opposite ends of the long oak dining table. The only sounds in the room were the clinking of heavy silverware and the low, steady hum of the central air conditioning unit. Nathan sliced into his meat with practiced surgical precision. He did not look up. He focused entirely on his meal, projecting an aura of untouchable authority. I rested my fork against the edge of my plate. The scent of seared beef and crushed black pepper drifted upward, but I had lost my appetite hours ago. I needed to document his verbal confirmation of the lockout. I needed to hear him state his deceptive reasoning aloud. I tried to log into our joint checking account this afternoon to schedule the monthly mortgage payment, I said, keeping my voice smooth and conversational. My password was rejected. The security questions have been altered. Nathan did not pause his chewing. He swallowed, took a measured sip of his dark wine, and finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were cold, flat, and devoid of any marital warmth. He wiped the corner of his mouth with a linen napkin, folding it neatly beside his plate. "I am migrating our accounts to a more secure server," he replied, his tone dismissive and flat.
We had a minor data breach alert at the manufacturing firm last week, and I am taking precautions across all my personal portfolios. Do not worry about it. I am handling the bills moving forward." He picked his knife back up, returning his attention to his steak. The conversation in his mind was permanently closed. He offered a plausible, corporate-sounding excuse to mask his blatant financial abuse. He thought the restriction would ignite a panic within me. He expected me to argue, to raise my voice, to beg for the new login credentials so I could feel secure. He believed that controlling the capital meant controlling my reality. I looked at the man sitting across the table, analyzing his smug, self-satisfied posture. I did not raise my voice. I did not demand the password. I simply picked up my fork, speared a piece of asparagus, and placed it into my mouth. I chewed my food in absolute silence, offering him a slow, compliant nod. Letting him believe he possessed the upper hand was the most dangerous weapon I currently wielded. He thought financial starvation would break my spirit. He did not realize I was already 3 distinct steps ahead of his crude manipulation. A logistics auditor understands that capital is merely another form of inventory. If a primary supply route becomes compromised, a competent auditor immediately establishes a secure bypass. 3 days prior, during my lunch hour at the healthcare network, I had walked into a small private credit union located 2 towns over. I sat down with a personal banker and opened a new, unlinked checking account under my name alone. I provided a newly established post office box for all mailing correspondence. Within an hour, I had contacted the hospital payroll department and legally rerouted my entire direct deposit. My upcoming bonuses, my standard salary, and my travel reimbursements were already flowing into a secure vault that Nathan did not even know existed. He thought he was siphoning my wages into his fraudulent offshore holdings. He was actually draining an empty pipe. Every time he tightened his grip on our joint assets, he provided me with another concrete layer of evidence. Every intercepted bank statement, every denied login attempt, every dismissive lie told over a steak dinner became a logged incident in my expanding dossier. Family court judges do not look favorably upon spouses who execute premeditated financial alienation. I was allowing his towering ego to blind him to the trap I was meticulously building around him. I let him play his hand, giving him enough rope to entangle himself beyond any hope of legal rescue. He finished his meal, pushed his plate away, and retreated to his home office, likely to review the construction budgets for his mother's beachfront paradise. I remained at the dining table, clearing the dishes with a steady, unhurried rhythm. The cold water running over the porcelain plates in the kitchen sink mirrored the icy clarity settling over my mind. Nathan believed he controlled the board. He thought he had orchestrated the perfect, bloodless coup, isolating me from my own resources while securing his hidden empire. But his engineered starvation was merely a sterile, artificial simulation of hardship. He had never faced a true, uncontrollable crisis. He had spent his entire life insulated by wealth, leveraging his title to force compliance, avoiding the messy, unpredictable realities of human suffering. The universe has a unique way of testing a person, character, stripping away the luxury suits and the corner office titles to reveal the unvarnished soul underneath. The true test of his cruelty was not unfolding in a corporate boardroom or a restricted bank ledger. The real emergency was currently riding in the back of a speeding ambulance, its sirens wailing through the muggy Tennessee night air, hurtling toward the sterile emergency room doors of my own hospital network. The phone resting quietly on my kitchen counter was about to ring, and the voice on the other end would shatter the final remaining illusion of our marriage. The week following his digital lockout dragged forward with a suffocating artificial silence. Nathan operated under the distinct assumption that his starvation tactics were slowly eroding my willpower.
Each morning he poured his coffee, adjusted his expensive silk ties, and walked past me without offering a single word, waiting for my inevitable surrender. He failed to comprehend that I was merely observing his behavioral patterns, gathering vital data from his towering arrogance. He believed the restriction of capital was the ultimate exertion of power. He had spent his entire adult life insulated by corporate wealth, viewing money as a tool to purchase compliance and avoid the unpredictable, messy realities of human suffering. He thought he controlled the board. He was entirely unaware that the universe was about to introduce a variable he could not manipulate, testing the profound depths of his cruelty. The situation escalated from a quiet financial dispute into a profound moral atrocity late on a Tuesday night. A shrill ringtone pierced the dark stillness of my bedroom shortly after midnight. I reached for the glowing screen, my eyes adjusting to the harsh light. The caller identification displayed the main dispatch routing number for the local emergency medical services. My mother, Teresa, is a woman forged from quiet resilience. She spent 35 years teaching primary school mathematics in the public education system, stretching a modest salary to ensure I never lacked the foundational tools for success. She possessed hands calloused from carrying heavy boxes of textbooks and a posture slightly bent from decades of leaning over student desks. She managed her meager retirement pension with the same exact precision I used to audit hospital supply chains. She never asked for handouts, and she never complained about her declining health. The paramedic on the line spoke with brisk clinical urgency. They had found Teresa collapsed on her kitchen floor, unresponsive, with a dangerously high fever and plummeting blood pressure. They were transporting her to the trauma center at my own healthcare network. I threw on my clothes, grabbed my keys, and drove through the deserted Nashville streets, my knuckles stark white against the steering wheel. The emergency department hummed with a frantic, sterile energy. The harsh fluorescent lighting washed all the warmth out of the waiting room, and the sharp scent of industrial bleach filled the corridors. The attending surgeon found me pacing the linoleum floor outside the trauma bay. The diagnosis was grim. Acute necrotizing cholecystitis, a severe gallbladder infection that was rapidly pushing her system toward fatal sepsis. Emergency surgery was required immediately to remove the necrotic tissue and stabilize her vital organs. While the surgical procedure itself was covered under her basic Medicare policy, the subsequent recovery protocol presented a daunting logistical obstacle. Because of her compromised immune system and the extreme severity of the infection, the surgeon mandated a 2-week stay at a specialized post-operative rehabilitation facility. The hospital billing coordinator, a young woman with tired eyes, approached me, holding a digital tablet. The Independent Rehabilitation Center required a mandatory $8,000 deposit to secure the specialized bed before the surgical team could legally initiate the full recovery plan. I walked away from the bustling nurse station and found a quiet, isolated corridor near a bank of vending machines. The low hum of the refrigeration units provided a steady drone to mask my conversation. I pulled out my smartphone and dialed my husband. The line rang 4 times before the connection clicked open. Nathan answered, his voice thick with sleep and laced with immediate, unfiltered annoyance. I kept my tone level, stripped of all panic, presenting the situation as a critical logistical hurdle. I explained the medical crisis, the severe risk of sepsis, the mandatory deposit, and the urgency of the impending surgery. I asked him to lift the digital restriction on our joint savings account so I could wire the necessary funds directly to the billing department. Nathan let out a long, dramatic sigh. The sound vibrated through the phone speaker, carrying the practiced cadence of a seasoned negotiator being asked to endure a minor scheduling inconvenience. "We do not have that kind of liquid cash right now, Morgan." He lied smoothly, his voice untroubled by the reality of my mother clinging to life just down the hall. I told you last week all our available capital is tied up in the auto manufacturing expansion. Tell your mom to talk to the financial aid office. Tell her to set up a payment plan. I have a crucial board presentation tomorrow, and I really need to sleep."
The line went dead. The dial tone echoed in my ear, a hollow, rhythmic beep that severed the final remaining thread of our marriage. I lowered the phone and stared at the blank glass screen. The cold, structural calm within me crystallized into something far more durable. It became diamond hard and razor sharp. Nathan was refusing to authorize $8,000 for my mother to survive a fatal infection, citing a lack of liquidity. Yet, according to the offshore ledgers sitting on my home office desk, he had authorized a wire transfer of $30,000 just last month to secure imported Italian marble countertops for his mother's luxury beach house. He valued Patricia vanity over Teresa's survival. He was willing to let a woman who dedicated her life to public service suffer just so he could launder stolen wealth for a woman who viewed the world with nothing but contempt. I did not call him back. I did not shed a single tear. Confrontation is a useless exertion of energy when dealing with a sociopath. I opened my secure banking application, navigating to the private credit union account I had quietly funded with my rerouted direct deposits. I initiated a direct electronic wire transfer of $8,000 to the hospital billing terminal. The transaction cleared the digital gateway within 4 seconds. The specialized bed was secured. The surgical team was authorized to proceed. I leaned the back of my head against the cool plaster wall of the hospital corridor, closing my eyes. In that sterile, echoing hallway, the illusion of my marriage fully evaporated. The dispute had officially transitioned from a mere financial manipulation into an unforgivable moral atrocity. The moral death of our relationship was final. I no longer harbored any lingering doubts, any whisper of nostalgia for the past 14 years, or any hesitation about the path forward. My objective was no longer just about protecting my grandfatherland or shielding my future assets. My objective was total, systematic eradication. I was going to dismantle his career, his reputation, and his hidden empire, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but ruin. By dawn, my mother was resting comfortably in the intensive care recovery unit, the steady green lines of the heart monitor tracing a rhythmic path across the screen. I sat in the vinyl chair beside her bed, watching her chest rise and fall. My phone vibrated against the plastic side table. A text message from Nathan illuminated the screen. He did not ask if the emergency surgery was successful. He did not ask if my mother was breathing. Instead, he sent a rigid mandate demanding my attendance at his upcoming corporate executive gala that weekend. He reminded me to pick up my dry-cleaned evening gown, stressing the importance of projecting a stable household to secure his impending promotion to vice president. He needed me to play the supportive, smiling wife in front of his traditional CEO. I stared at the text message, feeling a cold, predatory smile form on my lips. I typed a brief, compliant affirmation. I would attend his corporate dinner. I would wear the expensive dress and stand by his side. A formal executive gala filled with the exact board members who controlled his professional destiny was not a chore. It was the perfect hunting ground. He thought he was using me as a silent prop to elevate his career, but he had just invited his own executioner to the feast. Saturday evening descended upon the city with a thick, stifling heat, but the air inside our master bedroom was cold and devoid of any humanity. I had spent the entire afternoon sitting beside my mother in the intensive care recovery unit, listening to the steady, reassuring beep of her heart monitor. Leaving her bedside required immense willpower, but I understood the tactical necessity of the impending night. Despite the decaying foundation of our marriage, Nathan had issued a rigid mandate for me to attend his auto manufacturing firm annual executive gala. He was currently standing in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the silk lapels of his tailored tuxedo, projecting the polished image of an elite corporate leader. He needed to display a stable, supportive family life to secure his impending promotion to vice president of logistics. A fractured home life was viewed as a liability by his traditional superiors, and he was determined to use me as a beautiful, silent shield. I stood near the wardrobe, slipping into a floor-length sapphire silk gown he had purchased specifically for this event. The fabric felt heavy and cool against my skin, serving as a layer of armor for the psychological warfare ahead. I fastened a simple silver clasp at the nape of my neck, staring at my own reflection. The woman looking back at me possessed a steady, unblinking gaze. I applied a layer of crimson lipstick, playing my part with flawless precision. I was no longer an emotional spouse harboring a broken heart. I was a professional auditor, stepping into the heart of an active crime scene, preparing to evaluate the key players who controlled my husband's professional destiny. The drive downtown took 20 minutes. We rode inside his imported luxury sedan in total, suffocating silence. The hum of the tires against the asphalt and the soft rush of the air conditioning were the only sounds filling the tense cabin. Nathan kept both hands gripping the leather steering wheel, his jaw locked in a rigid line of concentration. He did not ask how my mother was recovering from her emergency surgery. He did not offer a single word of comfort. His mind was entirely consumed by corporate strategy, calculating which hands he needed to shake and which executives he needed to flatter. He assumed my silence was a byproduct of my helpless submission. He believed the financial freeze-out he initiated days earlier had effectively crushed my spirit, rendering me a docile prop for his evening. We arrived at a grand historic hotel in the center of the city. A valet opened my door, and I stepped out onto the pristine concrete under the glow of elaborate street lamps. We walked into the main ballroom, stepping into a world dripping with excess and manufactured charm. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over hundreds of guests. The air carried the scent of roasted tenderloin, expensive floral arrangements, and high-end botanical gin. A string quartet played a low classical melody in the corner, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to the room full of corporate sharks. The moment we crossed the threshold, a profound transformation overtook Nathan. The cruel, dismissive husband who had starved me of capital and abandoned my mother in a hospital corridor vanished instantly. He was replaced by a charismatic, charming executive who smiled warmly, clapped his colleagues on the shoulder, and laughed at jokes with practiced ease. He placed his right hand firmly against the small of my back, guiding me through the sea of tailored suits and glittering evening gowns. He was showcasing his perfect domestic life, using my presence to signal reliability and moral fortitude to the men holding the keys to his promotion. We navigated toward the center of the room, approaching a small cluster of older, distinguished individuals. At the center of the group stood Victor Caldwell, the Chief Executive Officer of the manufacturing network. Victor was a man forged from old Southern industrial wealth. He possessed a sharp, hawk-like gaze and a posture unbowed by his 70 years. He had built his reputation on ruthless efficiency, paired with strict traditional ethics. In his corporate culture, a man word was his bond, and financial discrepancies were punished with immediate termination. He valued corporate integrity above all other traits. Nathan approached Victor with a deferential, eager smile, smoothly breaking into the conversation. The CEO turned his sharp gaze toward us, his expression polite but calculating. After exchanging a few brief pleasantries about quarterly earnings and supply chain forecasts, Nathan shifted his stance, pulling me slightly forward. He kept his hand resting heavily on my waist, a subtle physical assertion of ownership in front of his superior. Victor, I do not believe you have formally met my wife, Morgan, Nathan said, his voice carrying a rich, artificial warmth. She is the true rock of our household. I could not manage the intense demands of this industry without her unwavering support at home. Victor extended a weathered, sturdy hand. It is a pleasure to finally meet you, Morgan, the older man said, his handshake firm and assessing. Nathan speaks highly of your domestic management. It takes a strong partner to keep a rising executive grounded. I offered a sweet, flawless smile, shaking his hand with equal firmness. I let a brief, calculated second pass, allowing the silence to draw the attention of the surrounding executives. The pleasure is mine, Victor, I replied, my voice smooth and carrying a bright conversational tone. And Nathan is certainly full of surprises when it comes to managing our family assets. He possesses a very creative approach to capital allocation. The air around us seemed to drop several degrees. Victor raised a silver eyebrow, his interest genuinely piqued by the unusual phrasing. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound of amusement. Creative asset management. Victor repeated, taking a sip from his crystal tumbler. That is a dangerous game in our sector, Nathan. We prefer our ledgers boring and predictable. What exactly is your background, Morgan? I am a senior logistics auditor for the Regional Healthcare Network, I answered, holding Victor's gaze directly. I specialize in forensic supply chain analysis and vendor contract compliance. I spend my days identifying hidden discrepancies and rooting out unauthorized financial diversions within large-scale corporate structures. Victor's expression shifted from polite amusement to authentic professional respect. He stepped slightly closer, fully engaging in the dialogue. Is that so? He noted his tone, indicating a shared kinship. That requires a very specific, unforgiving mindset. Finding the leaks in a multi-million-dollar pipeline is no easy task. You must have a remarkable eye for catching people who think they can hide the truth in the fine print. I do, I affirmed softly, maintaining my bright, pleasant smile. I have learned that when someone tells you a document is just routine paperwork, that is the exact moment you must read every single word. The physical reaction from Nathan was instantaneous and invisible to everyone but me. His fingers, resting against the silk fabric at my waist, suddenly clamped down with terrifying, bruising force. His nails dug into my ribcage, a silent, desperate warning transmitted through sheer physical pain. His facial features remained locked in a frozen, terrified grin, but the muscles in his jaw were twitching. He realized with sudden, horrifying clarity that my comment was not a clumsy attempt at making conversation. It was a targeted, surgical strike. I was speaking to his CEO in a coded language of financial fraud, dancing on the razor edge of exposing his entire criminal enterprise right in the middle of the ballroom. Victor laughed heartily, entirely unaware of the psychological warfare occurring mere inches from his face. I like your wife, Nathan, the CEO declared, clapping my husband on the shoulder. She understands the value of an honest audit. We could use more of that rigorous oversight in our own financial division. Thank you, Victor, Nathan managed to choke out, his voice tight and strained. If you will excuse us, I need to introduce Morgan to the regional directors near the terrace. Nathan steered me away from the group with an urgent, rigid stride. We reached a secluded corner near a towering floral arrangement, shielded from the immediate view of the executive circle. He leaned his face close to mine, his breath hot and frantic against my ear. His hand remained clamped onto my ribs, the pressure radiating a sharp, dull ache through my side. You need to watch your mouth, he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of raw panic and unmasked fury. Do not ever speak to him about our personal finances again. You have no idea what is at stake tonight. You will smile, you will remain silent, and you will not humiliate me. I did not flinch away from his grip. I did not break my structural calm. I reached out and took a fluted glass of chilled champagne from a passing waiter tray. I brought the crystal rim to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The cold, crisp bubbles washed over my tongue, a refreshing contrast to his suffocating heat. "I am just making polite conversation with your boss, Nathan," I whispered back, my eyes locking onto his panicked gaze. "You brought me here to be a supportive partner. I am simply networking." I turned my head away from him, letting my eyes sweep across the vast, glittering ballroom. I ignored the throbbing pain in my side. I focused my analytical lens on the room, identifying the key figures of the auto manufacturing board. I watched them laugh, shake hands, and trade corporate secrets. I cataloged their faces, their names, and their specific departments. Nathan thought he was using me as a silent prop to secure his corporate ascent. He thought his intimidation tactic in the corner had successfully suppressed my rebellion. He was entirely wrong. The brief interaction with Victor confirmed everything I needed to know about the company ethical boundaries. The trap was now fully constructed, requiring only the proper legal mechanism to trigger the spring. Nathan had forced me into this opulent space to witness his triumph, but he had miscalculated his audience. He had just formally introduced his wife to his executioners. Monday morning was rapidly approaching, and my week of personal leave was dedicated to one specific objective. The physical evidence gathered in my home office needed to be weaponized by a professional. It was time to leave the battlefield of the marital home and step into the unyielding arena of the justice system. I needed to find a lawyer capable of matching the profound depths of his deception with equal devastating force. The Monday morning sun cast long, sharp shadows across the concrete canyons of the Nashville financial district. I had spent the early hours of the day securing an extended care plan for my mother, ensuring her transition into the specialized rehabilitation facility was seamless and fully funded. Once her medical logistics were verified and stabilized, I submitted a formal request for a half-day of personal leave from the healthcare network. I traded my standard hospital badge and sensible clinical shoes for a tailored charcoal blazer and sharp leather heels. The transition was necessary. I was leaving the realm of patient care and entering a far more unforgiving arena. I drove downtown, navigating the dense late morning traffic, my pulse beating a slow, measured rhythm against my wrists. Resting on the passenger seat beside me was a thick black leather portfolio containing the culmination of my private investigation. I parked in a subterranean garage beneath a towering glass skyscraper and rode the express elevator to the 42nd floor. The brass placard beside the double-glass doors read, "Stanton and Associates." I walked into the reception area, bypassing the plush leather waiting chairs, and approached the receptionist. I had requested an emergency consultation the previous Friday, utilizing a quiet recommendation from a hospital board member who had survived a notoriously brutal separation. I was directed down a quiet, carpeted corridor toward a corner suite overlooking the Cumberland River. I stepped into the office of Valerie Stanton. Valerie was a legendary figure within the Tennessee legal community. She was a family law attorney universally feared by arrogant executives and wealthy socialites alike, holding a fierce reputation for dismantling hidden financial fraud in high-net-worth divorces. She did not operate a practice built on emotional counseling or gentle mediation. She was a tactical litigator who dealt exclusively in undeniable facts, forensic accounting, and ruthless extraction. Valerie stood behind a sprawling, polished mahogany desk. She wore a sharp emerald green suit, her dark hair pulled back into a severe, elegant knot. Her eyes were dark, piercing, and entirely devoid of the patronizing warmth I had grown so accustomed to receiving from my husband. She gestured toward a structured leather guest chair. She did not offer me a box of tissues or a sympathetic smile. She offered a pristine legal pad and a silver pen.
It was the exact environment I required.
I sat down, maintaining my rigid, upright posture. I did not waste her costly billable hours recounting the emotional decay of my 14-year marriage or the sting of the diamond tennis bracelet. I opened my black leather portfolio and retrieved the heavy-bound dossier I had compiled over the weekend. I slid the meticulous binder of offshore limited liability company filings, the destined property deeds, the highlighted joint bank statements, and the intercepted vendor receipts across the vast expanse of her mahogany desk. I need to initiate a divorce proceeding, I stated, my voice steady and clear. But standard asset division is insufficient. My husband is laundering my healthcare wages through a ghost corporation to purchase coastal real estate for his mother, utilizing my inherited family land as collateral for fraudulent commercial loans. Everything you need to trace the capital is in that binder. Valerie raised an eyebrow, a flicker of genuine intrigue crossing her composed features. She picked up the thick dossier, adjusting her reading glasses. For the next 20 minutes, the expansive corner office fell into a profound, heavy silence. The only sounds were the distant muted hum of the city traffic far below the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the sharp, rhythmic snap of heavy paper turning. I sat perfectly still, observing a master of her craft absorb my logistical audit. I watched her eyes dart across the highlighted columns, tracking the dates, verifying the escrow transfers, and examining the forged notary stamps. Her expression remained impassive until she reached the final section detailing the articles of incorporation for the Florida Shell Company. Valerie stopped turning the pages. She read the specific corporate registry document twice. When she finally looked up from the binder, her dark eyes gleamed with undeniable professional delight. A slow, razor-sharp smile spread across her face, transforming her from a stern legal counsel into a predator who had just caught the scent of blood in the water. He incorporated the holding company using your specific surname, but designated his mother as the sole authorized signing member. She asked, the edge of a laugh coloring her words. She shook her head, tapping a manicured fingernail against the printed Florida public record. Morgan, you have handed me a masterpiece of sheer masculine hubris. This is not just a standard divorce proceeding. This crosses the threshold into federal wire fraud and systemic identity misrepresentation. The legal terminology hung in the quiet air-conditioned room, validating every instinct that had driven me through the weekend. Valerie leaned forward, resting her forearms on the mahogany surface, shifting into an intense strategic cadence. In a typical high-asset separation, a deceitful spouse might attempt to hide a bonus or funnel cash to a sibling. Valerie explained, her tone sharp and educational. We fight over those hidden pools of money in mediation. But Nathan committed a fatal structural error. By funneling his own corporate bonuses into this fraudulent entity to bypass taxation and hide the assets from you, he commingled marital funds with stolen wages. More importantly, he violated the strict financial compliance and morality clauses embedded in every standard executive contract in the auto manufacturing sector. The brief conversation I shared with Victor, the traditional chief executive officer at the gala, rushed back into my memory. Victor demanded predictable ledgers and honest audits. He terminated employees for minor financial discrepancies. If he discovered one of his rising vice presidents was embezzling funds and committing mortgage fraud, the professional fallout would be instantaneous and catastrophic. We are not just going to file for a dissolution of marriage and request half of his remaining liquid assets. Valerie continued, picking up her silver pen to draft a rapid sequence of notes on her legal pad. We are going to leverage the illicit Florida property, the secret offshore accounts, and his impending corporate promotion entirely against him. If we present this evidence in a standard discovery phase, he will panic hire a defense firm and attempt to liquidate or transfer the coastal property before a judge can intervene.
We must strike before he even realizes he is standing on a battlefield. I watched her outline the tactical maneuver, feeling a profound sense of vindication wash away the lingering fatigue of the past few days. My rigorous logistics training had provided the raw ammunition, but Valerie possessed the heavy legal artillery required to launch the strike. We are filing an emergency ex parte financial injunction this afternoon. Valerie declared, her pen slashing across the yellow paper. It is a restrictive legal order that freezes every single account, deed, and line of credit associated with his name, his mother name, and Alvarez Holdings. The brilliance of an ex parte motion is that we file it strictly under seal. The judge reviews your forensic evidence in private and grants the freeze without requiring prior notification to the defendant. I processed the legal strategy, recognizing the flawless, airtight nature of her plan. Nathan would remain entirely blind to the impending devastation. He would continue to attend his corporate strategy meetings, drink his imported espresso, and believe his crude financial starvation tactics were successfully breaking my spirit. He would not receive a summons. He would simply wake up one morning to find his entire hidden empire locked behind a judicial vault. We are setting a trap, Valerie concluded, closing the binder and placing her hands flat on the desk. Once the judge signs the injunction tomorrow morning, the snare is set. We will schedule a mandatory mediation session for the following week. We will let him walk into that room, believing he holds all the leverage. And then, Morgan, we will drop the floor out from under him. I signed the formal retainer agreement right there in the corner office, securing the services of the most feared attorney in Nashville. I walked out of the glass doors and rode the elevator down to the subterranean garage, feeling an unprecedented lightness in my chest. The heavy burden of betrayal had been replaced by the cold, thrilling anticipation of justice. Nathan was an arrogant man who built his entire life on the assumption that the people around him were too compliant to read the fine print. He was about to walk blindly into a legal slaughterhouse of his own making. I drove back to my suburban neighborhood, the afternoon sun baking the asphalt. I expected to find an empty house, assuming Nathan was busy downtown polishing his resume for his impending promotion. Instead, as I turned onto my street, I spotted his luxury sedan parked in the driveway. The front door was unlocked. I stepped into the foyer, sensing an immediate shift in the atmospheric pressure of the home. Nathan was standing in the kitchen, dressed in casual slacks, holding a fresh, uncreased legal document in his hand. His posture was unnervingly relaxed, his face bearing a soft, conciliatory expression that I had not witnessed in months. He had recognized that his starvation tactics were failing to produce the desired hysteria, so he was pivoting to a new, desperate strategy. The predator was attempting to disguise himself as a peacemaker, entirely unaware that the true trap had already been set. The drive back to my suburban neighborhood felt remarkably different than the morning commute. The heavy, oppressive weight of betrayal had vanished, replaced by the sharp, focused energy of an impending strike. The afternoon sun baked the dark asphalt as I turned onto my quiet, tree-lined street. I expected to find an empty house, assuming Nathan was busy downtown polishing his resume for his upcoming promotion. Instead, his imported luxury sedan sat parked in the driveway, the engine block still ticking softly from a recent arrival. I stepped onto the front porch, the warm air clinging to my skin, and pushed open the unlocked door. I stepped fully into the foyer, my leather heels sinking slightly into the pristine Persian rug. Nathan stood in the kitchen, bathed in the late afternoon sunlight filtering through the bay windows. He was dressed in a casual cashmere sweater, his posture unnervingly relaxed. He held a crisp stack of legal paper in his left hand. He offered a soft, apologetic smile, a stark departure from the cold tyrant who had initiated a financial freeze-out only days prior. He had recognized his starvation tactics were failing to produce the desired hysteria, so he was pivoting to a new, desperate strategy. The predator was attempting to disguise himself as a peacemaker, unaware the true trap had already been set by Valerie Stanton. He gestured warmly toward the formal dining room. I walked past him, maintaining my steady, unhurried pace. Sitting at the long oak table was Donovan Hayes. Donovan was a managing partner at a mid-sized corporate firm downtown, but I knew him primarily as my husband's frequent weekend golf partner. They spent countless Sunday mornings navigating 18 holes at the exclusive country club, placing exorbitant wagers on their putting scores and trading insider industry gossip. Now, Donovan sat in my home, wearing a tailored navy suit and an expression of manufactured impartiality. His presence was a calculated variable introduced to provide a veneer of official authority to whatever scheme Nathan had concocted. Nathan pulled out a high-backed chair for me, a gentlemanly gesture masking a predatory intent. I sat down, resting my hands evenly on the polished oak surface. Nathan took the seat opposite me, leaning forward with an expression of profound sincerity. He explained he had done a great deal of reflecting over the past week. He realized the commercial loan application had caused unnecessary distress within our household. He claimed he wanted to make things right to guarantee my grandfather's ancestral acreage remained untouched forever. He called the document resting in his hand a post-nuptial agreement, claiming it was drafted by a neutral third party to ensure fair representation and protect my heritage. Donovan steepled his manicured fingers, speaking in a smooth, practiced cadence designed to pacify anxious clients. He assured me this was a standard domestic contract, designed exclusively to safeguard my inherited assets from any future business liabilities. He laid the thick document in front of me, pointing a sleek silver fountain pen at the signature line on page 12. "Just sign it, Morgan," Nathan urged, gently placing his warm hand over mine. "It protects your grandfather land entirely. We can put this ugly chapter behind us and move forward as a united front." I withdrew my hand from beneath his grasp. I did not pick up the silver pen. Instead, I pulled the thick document closer, flipped back to the very first page, and began to read. The silence in the dining room shifted from expectant to stifling. The central air conditioning cycled on the low hum, filling the quiet void. Donovan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, tapping the toe of his leather shoe against the hardwood floor. Nathan's breathing grew shallow and irregular. They expected the old version of me, the compliant spouse who felt intimidated by dense legal jargon and trusted her husband verbal summaries. But I was fresh from the corner office of a ruthless litigator. I understood exactly how to navigate treacherous bureaucratic text. I read through the initial declarations, noting the standard asset protection language Donovan had highlighted. But on page 9, buried beneath paragraphs regarding future liability and debt allocation, I found the hidden snare. It was a dense, convoluted indemnity clause woven together with complex corporate phrasing. I read the text twice to ensure I comprehended the sheer audacity of the stipulation. The clause explicitly stated that the undersigned retroactively consented to any and all financial transfers, capital redistributions, and corporate asset allocations executed by either party during the duration of the marriage. It further waived any right to seek restitution for undisclosed expenditures or offshore holdings. Signing this document would grant Nathan total legal immunity. It would formally absolve him of the offshore funneling the Destin property acquisition and the systematic theft of my healthcare bonuses. He had realized his exposure. The digital lockout had not produced the swift surrender he desired, leaving him vulnerable to discovery. He brought his golf buddy into my home to execute a sophisticated con, disguising a blanket pardon as a benevolent olive branch. He was trying to trick me into signing away my right to prosecute his fraud.
I looked up from the paper. Donovan was attempting to maintain a professional veneer, but a bead of sweat had formed at his temple, catching the afternoon light. Nathan wore a tight, hopeful grin, waiting for my compliance. I closed the document, aligning the edges with a calm, precise tap against the oak table. I looked Nathan directly in the eye, stripping away every ounce of artificial warmth. "I am not signing anything," I stated, my voice echoing evenly in the quiet room. Nathan's grin collapsed instantly. The soft, conciliatory mask vanished, replaced by the sharp, cornered panic of a man whose lifeline had just been severed. Donovan sat up straight, abandoning his relaxed posture. He attempted to salvage the ambush, arguing that I was misunderstanding the protective nature of the contract, insisting the wording was standard boilerplate for asset preservation in high-net-worth households. I turned my gaze to the lawyer, projecting the same icy authority I used when terminating fraudulent hospital vendors. "Do not insult my intelligence, Donovan," I replied smoothly. "A retroactive waiver for undisclosed capital transfers has nothing to do with protecting a mountain property. It is a calculated liability shield designed to pardon financial theft." I stood up from the table, smoothing the front of my blazer. Nathan's face twisted into a mask of unfiltered desperation. He reached across the oak surface, his voice rising in pitch, demanding I sit back down and act reasonably. He insisted I was ruining our future over a paranoid delusion. I sidestepped his grasping hand. I picked up the unsigned contract and handed it back to the stunned attorney. "If you wish to correspond regarding our marital assets moving forward, I suggest you retain formal legal counsel," I advised Nathan. I turned and walked out of the dining room, my heels clicking sharply against the floorboards, leaving the two men sitting in shattered, defeated silence. I walked straight out the front door, the heavy wood closing behind me with a decisive thud. I walked to my car, slid behind the steering wheel, and locked the doors. The interior of the vehicle felt like a secure command center. I pulled my phone from my purse and dialed Valerie Stanton direct line. She answered on the second ring. I recounted the attempted ambush, detailing the specific wording of the indemnity clause and the presence of his golfing partner. Valerie let out a sharp, triumphant laugh that crackled through the phone speaker. "He is terrified, Morgan," she declared, her tone brimming with predatory satisfaction. "He knows he left a trail, and he tried to plug the leak before the dam bursts. The post-nuptial agreement proves he is aware of his own criminal liability. The trap has officially failed. The countdown has begun." She informed me the ex parte injunction would be signed by the judge within hours. She was already drafting the formal communication to his corporate legal representation. She would book a mandatory mediation date for the following week, utilizing a neutral conference room located in the very heart of the downtown financial district. The final board was set, and my husband was about to walk into a room where his charm and his golf buddies could not save him from the forensic truth. The week leading up to the mediation moved with the slow, deliberate pacing of a gathering storm. Valerie Stanton executed her legal maneuvers in total secrecy, operating with the precision of a seasoned combat strategist. The ex parte financial injunction was signed by a district judge on Tuesday morning, quietly and legally locking down every checking account, every property deed, and every hidden line of credit tied to Nathan, his mother Patricia, and their fraudulent ghost corporation. Nathan remained entirely oblivious to the silent detonation. He continued his daily routine, driving to his executive suite, purchasing his imported morning espresso, and existing in a fabricated reality that had already been dismantled by court order. The true stroke of tactical genius, however, was Valerie selecting the battlefield. She did not schedule the mandatory mediation in her own law office, which would have allowed Nathan to maintain a sense of detachment. Instead, she booked a neutral, independent conference room situated on the 34th floor of the exact same downtown glass and steel high-rise where Nathan Auto Manufacturing headquarters occupied the top tiers. This geographic choice was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. Nathan had spent the last decade conquering this specific skyscraper. He knew the security guards in the lobby by their first names. He rode these express elevators alongside the very executive board members he constantly sought to impress. This towering building was his professional fortress, the physical monument to his success and his unchecked arrogance. By forcing him to conduct our divorce settlement inside these familiar walls, Valerie transformed his sanctuary into an execution chamber. He could not compartmentalize his domestic failures away from his professional ambitions. They were now sharing the exact same circulated air. I arrived 20 minutes early on the day of the mediation. I bypassed the bustling lobby cafe where I knew his corporate colleagues often gathered for morning meetings. I stepped into the polished chrome elevator, watching the digital floor numbers climb higher into the Nashville skyline, feeling the subtle shift in air pressure. I wore a sharp, tailored slate gray blazer and matching trousers. I carried no oversized tote bag, no desperate stacks of disorganized receipts, and no emotional baggage. I held only a sleek black leather satchel containing a single pristine manila folder. My mother was safely recovering in her specialized rehabilitation facility, her medical expenses fully secured by my redirected logistics wages. I had nothing left to lose, and an entire hidden empire left to destroy. The conference room was vast and intimidating, designed to facilitate high-stakes corporate mergers rather than dissolve broken marriages. An expansive, polished mahogany table stretched across the center of the room, flanked by heavy, ergonomic leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Cumberland River winding through the city far below. Valerie arrived shortly after I did, wearing a formidable burgundy suit, carrying her own streamlined briefcase. We took our seats on one side of the wide table. We did not review our strategy. We did not need to whisper last-minute adjustments. The mathematics of his fraud were undeniable, and the trap was perfectly primed. We simply waited in the cool, silent room, listening to the low hum of the central ventilation system. Precisely at 10 o'clock, the heavy glass doors swung inward. Nathan walked into the room, flanked by a man who looked exactly like the type of overpriced defense attorney guilty executives hire to bludgeon their victims. The lawyer wore a custom pinstripe suit, carrying a bulging leather briefcase, projecting the predatory confidence of a man who billed thousands of dollars an hour to make problems disappear. Nathan mirrored his hired counsel's swagger. He wore his finest power suit, a dark navy ensemble paired with a blood-red silk tie. He walked with his shoulders squared and his chin tilted upward, a textbook display of manufactured bravado. He assumed this gathering was a standard, tedious negotiation over property division and spousal support. He believed the failed post-nuptial ambush with his golfing partner had been a minor setback, a temporary miscommunication that his expensive new attorney would quickly override. He looked across the wide expanse of mahogany, his eyes darting toward my single, thin, black satchel, and then toward Valerie. A fleeting shadow of unease passed over his features when he recognized the legendary litigator sitting beside me. But his towering ego quickly suppressed the instinctual warning. He pulled out his chair and sat down, occupying the space directly opposite me. His attorney immediately opened the thick briefcase, extracting heavy stacks of legal pads, printed statutes, and complex financial disclosures. The lawyer clicked his pen, arranging his documents with loud, performative efficiency. He was preparing to litigate a grueling battle over retirement accounts and the suburban marital home. He was preparing for a war of attrition,
hoping to exhaust my financial resources until I accepted a fraction of my rightful share.
Nathan leaned back into his leather chair, hooking one arm casually over the armrest. He raised his left wrist, checking the time deliberately, flashing the heavy silver face of his luxury Rolex. The metallic click of the watch band echoed in the quiet room. It brings us right back to the moment the snare was finally pulled tight. He looked at me, a tight, patronizing sneer curling the corner of his lip. His eyes held no remorse for the stolen funds, no guilt for abandoning my mother in the hospital, and no respect for the 14 years I had dedicated to our household. He saw me merely as a logistical inconvenience, blocking his path to the vice presidency. "You are making a huge mistake," Morgan Nathan said. His voice dropped into that low, authoritative octave he used to command factory floor managers and intimidate junior staff. The sound was designed to vibrate with unyielding certainty. "You rejected a very generous offer last week. If you think you can drag this out and extort me, you are deeply misguided. You are going to walk away with nothing." The harsh words hung in the chilled, air-conditioned space. His defense attorney nodded slightly, offering a silent endorsement of the threat. They expected me to flinch. They expected me to launch into a defensive, emotional tirade demanding fairness and equity. They wanted me to yell, to cry, to outline my grievances so they could systematically dismiss my emotions as feminine hysteria. I did not respond. I did not blink. I sat perfectly still, maintaining the cold, structural calm that had guided me through the entire week of forensic auditing. The anger that had ignited when I first opened his hidden commercial loan application had burned itself out, leaving behind a pure, crystalline focus. I studied his face, analyzing the rigid set of his jaw and the faint, rapid pulse beating at the base of his throat. He was projecting dominance, but his physiological responses betrayed a buried, primal terror. He was a man standing on a trapdoor, entirely unaware that the lever had already been pulled. I was not sitting in this corporate high-rise to negotiate a 50-50 split of our checking accounts. I was not here to barter for the dining room furniture or request a modest alimony settlement. I was here to present a mathematically impossible reality that he could not escape, a reality built entirely from his own deceptive paperwork. For over a decade, his golden rule had governed our household. He had slid complex documents across the kitchen granite, tapped the bottom line with his expensive pen, and instructed me to just sign and stop asking questions. He had trained me to be compliant. He had weaponized my trust to build a secret empire for his mother, funding luxury coastal real estate with the sweat of my hospital shifts. But his arrogance had triggered a fatal miscalculation. He pushed too hard, assuming my loyalty was synonymous with stupidity. I had finally broken his cardinal rule. I had read every single page. I had audited every hidden ledger, traced every offshore wire transfer, and documented every forged signature. I had compiled the exact data required to terminate his career, seize his hidden assets, and subject him to federal prosecution. The silence stretched to the breaking point. Nathan's sneer began to falter, replaced by a deep, unsettling confusion. His lawyer stopped arranging his legal pads, sensing the unnatural stillness radiating from our side of the table. The typical posturing of a divorce mediation was entirely absent. Valerie did not speak. She simply folded her hands over her pristine notebook, allowing me to take the lead. This was my audit, and this was my execution to deliver. I reached down to the sleek black satchel resting near my polished shoes. The leather creaked softly as I unfastened the silver buckle. I slid my hand inside, my fingertips brushing against the smooth, rigid surface of the manila folder.
I pulled it upward, lifting the culmination of my forensic investigation into the bright, unsparing light of the conference room. I placed the folder squarely in the center of the mahogany table, directly between Nathan and myself. I was about to use his own rule against him, and now he was going to have to sit in agonizing silence and listen to every single word. Valerie reached across the polished expanse of the mahogany table and placed her hand flat over the manila folder I had just produced. The opposing counsel cleared his throat, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He unclicked his fountain pen, preparing to launch into a tedious, protracted monologue regarding the equitable distribution of our suburban marital home and the standard division of shared retirement accounts. He opened his mouth to speak, ready to dictate the pacing of the room. Valerie did not grant him the opportunity to utter a single syllable. "We will be bypassing the standard asset division protocols this morning," Valerie stated, her voice slicing through the chilled air conditioning with surgical precision. She opened the folder, extracted a single crisp sheet of paper featuring a Florida State Registry seal, and slid it directly across the table. The heavy parchment glided over the polished wood, coming to a halt mere inches from the defense attorney's folded hands. "This is the recorded deed for a beachfront penthouse condominium located in Destin, Florida." Valerie continued, her tone remaining flat and factual. "The purchase price was $1.2 million. Your client utilized diverted marital funds to execute this acquisition. He attempted to mask the transaction by funneling the capital through a fraudulent limited liability company named Alvarez Holdings. He deliberately selected my client's maiden surname to create an optical illusion of legitimate joint ownership. Yet he designated his mother, Patricia Pierce, as the sole authorized signing member." The defense attorney stopped moving. He stared at the printed document, his eyes darting across the bold headers, the purchase amounts, and the notarized signatures. The color began to drain from his face, leaving his complexion a sickly pale gray. He was a seasoned litigator who charged exorbitant hourly rates to protect wealthy men from their own poor decisions. He understood immediately that his client had lied to him during their confidential consultations. Nathan had sworn their portfolio consisted only of standard domestic accounts and a contested piece of mountain acreage. He had never disclosed an offshore corporate entity, nor had he mentioned $1 million coastal property. The attorney glanced sideways at Nathan, his professional demeanor fracturing into genuine alarm. A concealed asset of this magnitude elevated the proceedings from a simple contentious divorce into the realm of severe civil fraud. Nathan shifted uncomfortably in his ergonomic leather chair. He tugged at the collar of his dress shirt, attempting to loosen the sudden constriction around his throat. He offered a strained, dismissive chuckle, a weak sound that echoed hollowly in the vast conference room. "It is a legitimate family trust," Nathan stammered, his voice lacking its usual booming resonance. "I set it up for estate planning purposes. I was going to tell Morgan about it once the initial renovations were finished. It is merely a tax harbor. There is nothing illegal about securing future generational wealth." He looked toward his lawyer, expecting the man to nod in agreement to validate his flimsy excuse and begin constructing a defense. The lawyer did not nod. He continued staring at the Florida deed, recognizing the lethal implications of the hidden LLC. "That is a fascinating interpretation of generational wealth," I noted, breaking my silence for the first time since entering the room. I kept my voice low, measuring each word to ensure it landed with maximum impact. "Stealing years of my healthcare performance bonuses to shield your mother from federal tax evasion penalties is certainly a creative estate plan, but the civil fraud is only the beginning of your exposure today." I reached back into my black leather satchel and pulled out a second, much smaller stack of paper. It consisted of 3 clipped sheets. I did not slide them to the attorney. I slid them directly toward my husband.
During my logistical audit of your offshore funneling, I discovered a very interesting misdirected physical document. I explained, watching his eyes track the movement of the paper. An accounts receivable clerk for a high-end coastal glass manufacturer made a clerical routing error. They processed a billing invoice for custom hurricane-grade impact windows intended for the Destin property. However, instead of mailing the invoice to the Florida LLC, they defaulted to the primary billing address on file. The invoice arrived in our suburban mailbox the same day you initiated the digital bank lockout.
Nathan stopped breathing. His chest froze mid-inhalation. The arrogant sneer that had defined his features for over a decade vanished, replaced by a raw, unfiltered terror. He knew exactly what that specific invoice contained.
A standard spouse might throw away a stray piece of mail, assuming it was junk.
I continued, my tone relentless and smooth. But I am a logistics auditor. I verify supply chains for a living. I read the billing codes. To fund the remainder of this fraudulent LLC, you did not just steal from my hospital earnings. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms against the cool mahogany edge, bringing myself closer to his crumbling reality. You expensed over $200,000 of the Florida luxury renovations directly to your auto manufacturing employer, I said, enunciating every syllable. You authorized the purchase of imported Italian marble, coastal defense glass, and premium architectural services. And you routed those invoices through your corporate expense account, deliberately classifying them under the internal billing code for executive retreat accommodations. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a man's entire universe collapsing inward. The defense attorney recoiled, physically pushing his chair back from the table. The revelation altered the atmosphere of the room in an instant. Misappropriating marital funds was a civil dispute. Forging corporate invoices to embezzle hundreds of thousands of dollars from a major industrial manufacturer was a federal felony. It carried mandatory prison sentences.
You are lying, Nathan shrieked. He leaped out of his heavy leather chair, the sudden force sending the seat crashing backward against the glass wall behind him. His hands slammed down onto the mahogany table, rattling the crystal water pitchers. The veins in his neck bulged against his skin. His face turned a deep, mottled purple, flushed with the frantic, cornered panic of a predator caught in a steel trap.
You fabricated those documents, he screamed, spittle flying from his lips, his voice echoing shrilly across the 34th floor. You hacked my accounts. You are trying to frame me because you are bitter. Nobody is going to believe a low-level hospital clerk over a senior corporate executive. His carefully constructed facade shattered into irreparable fragments. He was no longer the polished, charismatic leader who charmed CEOs and manipulated boardrooms. He was a frantic, hyperventilating criminal, watching the walls close in. His expensive defense attorney did not stand up to defend him. The lawyer looked at the printed invoice resting on the table, noting the authentic corporate billing codes and the unmistakable signature of his own client authorizing the fraudulent expense. A seasoned attorney knows when a case transitions from a lucrative defense into a radioactive liability. Representing a client who actively lies about federal embezzlement during a sealed legal proceeding is a rapid path to disbarment. The attorney reached out and retrieved his pristine legal pad. He placed it inside his bulging leather briefcase. He gathered his expensive fountain pen, his statutes, and his blank settlement forms. "What are you doing?" Nathan demanded, turning his frantic gaze toward his own counsel. "Tell them this is inadmissible. Do your job!" The lawyer snapped the twin brass locks of his briefcase shut. The sharp, metallic clicks sounded like a final verdict. "I was retained to represent you in a standard marital dissolution," the attorney stated,
his voice stripped of all prior swagger, replaced by a cold, self-preserving professionalism. I was not retained to participate in the concealment of corporate embezzlement. I am formally withdrawing as your counsel of record, effective immediately. I advise you not to speak another word until you secure a federal defense firm. The lawyer turned on his heel and walked out of the conference room, pulling the heavy glass door open and disappearing down the carpeted hallway. He did not look back. Nathan stood isolated on his side of the long table. His chest heaved as he dragged shallow, ragged breaths into his lungs. He looked at the empty space where his lawyer had just been sitting. He looked down at the Florida deed and the forged vendor invoice resting on the polished wood. He slowly raised his head, his eyes scanning the panoramic windows behind me, looking out over the sprawling Nashville skyline. He was standing in the exact center of his professional fortress. This skyscraper was the monument to his ambition, the building where he expected to be crowned vice president. He had strutted through the lobby for years, projecting an image of untouchable power. Now, the very walls of his corporate sanctuary seemed to press inward, suffocating him. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles bone white, struggling to draw air into his lungs as the sheer, devastating weight of his exposure crushed down upon his chest. He thought the ambush was over. He believed his lawyer abandoning him was the final blow. He had no idea the true executioner had not even entered the room yet. The heavy glass door clicked shut, sealing the conference room once again in absolute stillness. Nathan remained frozen on his side of the expansive mahogany table. His breathing was harsh and erratic, echoing loudly against the polished wood and pristine glass walls. He stared blankly at the empty leather chair where his expensive defense attorney had been sitting just moments prior. The reality of his isolation was slowly penetrating his thick layer of corporate arrogance. In the high-stakes world of executive litigation, a lawyer abruptly withdrawing representation during a sealed mediation is not merely a setback. It is a professional death sentence. It signals to every judge and opposing counsel that the client is toxic, untrustworthy, and legally indefensible. Nathan slowly lowered himself back into his seat. His tailored navy suit, which had looked so formidable less than an hour ago, now appeared loose and disheveled. His broad shoulders slumped inward. He looked like a hollow shell of a man, stripped of his manufactured bravado, waiting for the final blow to land. Valerie Stanton did not offer him a moment to recover. She operated with the calculating precision of a metronome. She lifted her left arm and glanced down at the sleek platinum watch encircling her wrist. It was exactly 10:17 in the morning. She lowered her arm, folding her hands neatly over her legal pad. She did not raise her voice to deliver the killing strike. She did not need to shout. The undeniable facts of her forensic audit were loud enough to shatter concrete. She looked directly at my husband, her dark eyes entirely devoid of pity or mercy. She nodded once toward me, transferring the floor, allowing me to execute the final maneuver of the operation. I leaned forward, resting my forearms against the cool edge of the table. I kept my gaze locked onto his wavering eyes. The true payoff, the gasp-inducing reality of modern corporate life, was about to be delivered beautifully. As we sit here right now, I began, my voice soft and perfectly modulated. A private, bonded courier is stepping out of an elevator on the 42nd floor of this exact building. He is carrying a sealed envelope containing a duplicate copy of the forensic audit resting on this table. He has strict instructions to bypass the administrative assistants and hand-deliver the package directly into the hands of Victor Caldwell. I watched the name register in his mind. I recalled the opulent executive gala from the previous weekend. I reminded him of the moment he proudly introduced me to his strict, traditional chief executive officer.
Victor is a man who values predictable ledgers and absolute corporate integrity, I continued smoothly. He terminates employees for minor logistical errors. I can only imagine how he will react when he opens that envelope and discovers his rising vice president has been actively forging vendor invoices, expensing luxury coastal building materials under the guise of executive retreat accommodations, and embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from the auto manufacturing firm. Nathan fell backward into his ergonomic chair as if he had been physically struck by a heavy, blunt object. The last remaining traces of color vanished from his skin, leaving his face a sickly, translucent white. His hands began to tremble violently, knocking against the armrests. He understood the ruthless architecture of the corporate world better than anyone. He knew exactly what Victor Caldwell would do upon reviewing those forged invoices. If the board of directors saw that irrefutable evidence, Nathan would not merely lose his highly anticipated promotion, he would be immediately terminated for cause, stripped of his severance package, and permanently blacklisted from the manufacturing industry. Furthermore, the board would be legally obligated to report the massive internal theft to federal authorities to satisfy their own shareholder compliance regulations. He was staring down the barrel of severe embezzlement charges and a mandatory federal prison sentence. His entire hidden empire was incinerating before his eyes. The luxury beachfront condo, the imported Italian marble, the expensive sports cars, and the elite country club memberships were all evaporating into smoke. He was losing his income, his reputation, and his freedom in a single devastating stroke. He looked across the mahogany surface, his eyes wide and brimming with raw, unfiltered despair. The smug, controlling tyrant who had initiated a cruel financial freeze-out to starve his wife into submission was completely gone. In his place sat a broken, terrified criminal begging for a lifeline. "What do you want?" he whispered. His voice was a fragile, broken rasp, entirely stripped of its former booming authority. Valerie reached into her streamlined briefcase and retrieved a fresh, immaculate stack of legal documents. She did not present a negotiation framework. She presented a formal instrument of total surrender. She slid the thick packet across the table, positioning it precisely in front of his shaking hands. "You are going to sign over 100% of the equity in the suburban marital home," Valerie dictated, her tone cold and unyielding. "You are going to relinquish every single joint retirement account, investment portfolio, and liquid asset accumulated during the duration of your 14-year marriage. Furthermore, you will contact your mother, Patricia Pierce, this afternoon. You will force her to legally transfer the entire deed of the Destin property over to Morgan before the close of standard business hours today." Nathan stared down at the surrender documents, his breath coming in shallow, frantic gasps. Relinquishing the marital home and the retirement accounts would leave him entirely destitute, starting over with absolutely zero capital. But the demand regarding the Florida property was the ultimate crushing blow. He had committed federal corporate fraud to purchase that luxury penthouse, specifically to save his entitled mother from her own ruinous debts. Forcing Patricia to sign over the deed meant she would lose her safe harbor. She would be left penniless, entirely exposed to the impending federal tax evasion charges she had been desperately trying to outrun. Her beloved son, the golden provider she had bragged about to her high society friends, was now the instrument of her absolute destruction. He opened his mouth to protest the draconian terms, but Valerie raised a single manicured finger, silencing him instantly. "In exchange for your total compliance," Valerie stated, "Morgan will not walk into a local police precinct and file formal criminal charges against you for systemic identity theft and wire fraud. She will not actively pursue prosecution for your decision to fraudulently use her maiden surname to incorporate your offshore ghost company. I picked up the narrative thread, leaning closer to ensure he heard every single word. And your corporate expense fraud remains entirely between you and your board of directors, I added softly. Modern corporate entities despise public scandal. Victor Caldwell will likely terminate your employment immediately and force you to sign a quiet non-disclosure agreement to avoid a shareholder panic. He will bury the embezzlement to protect the stock price, provided you disappear quietly. You will lose your job, your wealth, and your Mother Beach house. But if you sign those papers right now, you might manage to avoid spending the next decade wearing a federal prison uniform. Nathan's hands were shaking so violently he could barely keep them resting on the table. He looked down at the thick stack of settlement documents that formally stripped him of his entire life. He had no leverage, no legal counsel, and no escape route. He was trapped in a flawless, inescapable logistical cage of my own design. I reached my right hand into the interior pocket of my tailored slate gray blazer. My fingers brushed against the cold, familiar metal barrel of a writing instrument. It was the exact same expensive gold fountain pen he had carelessly left behind on our kitchen granite island the morning he told me I lacked the intellectual capacity to understand a commercial loan. I had kept it safe in my drawer, waiting for the perfect opportunity to return his property. I pulled the gold pen from my blazer. I held it up into the bright light of the conference room, allowing him to recognize the ornate detailing on the cap. I pressed the top mechanism down. The sharp, mechanical click echoed loudly in the silent room. A final period placed at the end of a 14-year sentence. I placed the pen horizontally on the polished mahogany wood. I gave it a firm, deliberate push. The heavy gold instrument slid smoothly across the wide table, stopping precisely on top of the signature line of his surrender document. I looked into his defeated, hollow eyes, delivering the ultimate payload of poetic justice. "Just sign, Nathan," I whispered, echoing the exact phrase he had used to control me for over a decade. "Do not ask questions." Nathan reached for the gold fountain pen. His fingers trembled, lacking the smooth, confident dexterity he usually displayed when dominating boardrooms or intimidating junior staff. He gripped the polished metal barrel. The golden nib met the heavy stock paper of the settlement agreement. The sharp, scratching sound of ink transferring to the page echoed in the cavernous conference room. It was a harsh, rhythmic noise, the auditory signature of a man systematically dismantling his own life. He signed his name on the first page. He turned to the next. He signed the asset relinquishment waivers. He signed the joint retirement transfer authorizations. He signed the formal mandate compelling his mother to surrender the coastal property deed. Each stroke of the pen drained another reservoir of his stolen wealth. He did not look up. He did not speak. When he reached the final page, he let the pen slip from his grasp. It clattered against the mahogany wood, rolling to a stop near the pristine legal pad resting in front of Valerie Stanton. Valerie gathered the documents with unhurried clinical precision. She aligned the edges, tapping them lightly against the table, verifying every signature and every initial. She slipped the stack into her streamlined briefcase and secured the brass latch. The mediation was formally concluded. Nathan remained seated, staring blankly at the polished wood grain, a hollow shell of an executive who had gambled his entire existence on the assumption that I would never read the fine print. I stood up, smoothed the front of my slate gray blazer, picked up my black leather satchel, and walked out of the glass doors. I did not look back. The corporate execution unfolded exactly as I had projected. 3 days after the mediation, The board of directors convened an emergency closed-door session. Victor Caldwell had received the courier package containing my forensic audit. He reviewed the highlighted vendor invoices, the offshore holding company registries, and the undeniable proof of expense fraud. In the sterile, unforgiving arena of industrial manufacturing, trust is a fragile currency. Victor did not tolerate betrayal. He summoned Nathan into his corner office. There was no shouting. There was no public spectacle. Corporate entities detest scandal because scandal threatens shareholder confidence. Nathan was terminated for cause, effective immediately. Security personnel escorted him to his desk, provided him with a single cardboard box for his personal effects, and walked him out of the glass lobby in broad daylight. He was forced to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement to avoid federal prosecution, permanently barring him from ever holding another executive position in the sector. His career simply ceased to exist. The subsequent descent was swift and poetic in its justice. Stripped of his high six-figure salary, his retirement accounts, and his liquid assets, Nathan could no longer sustain the flashy, shifting sand lifestyle he prized above all else. He was forced to surrender his leased luxury vehicles and sell his imported Italian suits to cover immediate legal retainers. Patricia faced a similar harsh reality. When the deed to the Florida penthouse transferred into my name, she lost her extravagant safe harbor. She was forced to pack her designer luggage and vacate the beachfront paradise she had helped steal, returning to Tennessee with nothing but her immense debts. Mother and son were reduced to their fundamental, unvarnished selves, carrying the crushing weight of their own financial ruin. They relocated to the outskirts of the city, signing a lease on a cramped, unremarkable two-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and rattling window frames. The sheer irony of their new living arrangement provided a satisfying, silent victory. The modest apartment complex they selected belonged to a subsidiary real estate portfolio managed and owned by my regional healthcare network. I had processed the supply chain logistics for the maintenance team servicing those exact buildings. Every month, when Nathan submitted his meager rent check, the funds flowed directly into the operational budget of the very hospital system that employed me. The man who had mocked my logistical career, the man who had tried to financially starve me into submission, was now living under a roof owned by my employer. I had indirectly become his landlord. He spent his days trapped in a small, poorly insulated room, contributing to my annual salary, while he searched for entry-level employment. I did not keep the coastal property. I had no desire to retain a physical monument to his deception or smell the salt air of a fraud. I hired a relentless real estate broker and placed the destined penthouse on the open market. The luxury condominium sold within 3 weeks to a wealthy retiring couple looking for a vacation retreat. I took the substantial profits from the sale, the reclaimed wealth they had siphoned from my hospital bonuses, and I redirected the capital back to its rightful origin. I paid off the lingering property taxes and established a perpetual maintenance fund for my grandfather's ancestral land in the Great Smoky Mountains. The terrain was secure. The ancient timberland, the soil that anchored my identity, would never again be threatened by a fraudulent commercial loan. My gravity was restored, anchored firmly in the soil he had tried to steal. I also prioritized the true emergency that had catalyzed my awakening. I utilized a portion of the reclaimed offshore funds to establish a robust, irrevocable medical trust for my mother. Teresa recovered beautifully from her severe gallbladder infection. The specialized rehabilitation facility provided exemplary care, and her strength returned with each passing week. She returned to her own home, tending to her garden and enjoying her retirement. The trust ensured she would never have to worry about a hospital bill, a copay, or a deductible for the rest of her life. I had secured her health without ever needing to ask permission from a man who viewed her survival as a logistical inconvenience.
The ultimate unexpected triumph arrived 1 month later. I was sitting at my desk in the hospital network logistics department reviewing a complex pharmaceutical supply contract when my office telephone rang. The caller identification displayed a familiar downtown corporate prefix. It was Victor Caldwell. The manufacturing chief executive officer spoke with his trademark gravelly authority. He explained that discovering Nathan internal fraud had prompted a rigorous company-wide review of their financial oversight protocols. He recognized that their internal accounting division lacked the specific forensic exactitude required to catch sophisticated logistical theft. He remembered our brief, loaded conversation at the executive gala. He recalled my sharp, unyielding approach to auditing. Victor formally offered my independent logistics consulting firm a lucrative multi-year contract to overhaul their entire corporate supply chain verification system. In a flawless twist of fate, the very company that had fired my husband hired me to fortify their defenses. I replaced his stolen salary with my own professional success. Autumn has now arrived in Tennessee. The sweltering summer humidity has broken, replaced by cool, crisp air carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. I sit on the wooden deck of my back porch early this morning. The sun is just beginning to rise over the tree line, casting long golden rays across the frost-covered grass. I wrap both hands around a ceramic mug of hot, black coffee. I take a slow sip, feeling the bitter warmth settle into my chest. I watch the thick white mist slowly clear from the distant hills, revealing the vibrant, solid landscape underneath. The house is quiet, but it is no longer the tense, suffocating silence of a broken marriage. It is a peaceful, restorative stillness. The lingering sting of the betrayal has faded entirely, washed away by the steady rhythm of a life rebuilt on a foundation of unvarnished truth. The memories of his condescension, his digital lockouts, and his hidden coastal empires hold no power over me. They are merely discarded data points in a closed ledger. I look out toward the horizon, reflecting on the profound transformation of the past few months. Society often conditions women to prioritize compliance over curiosity. We are taught to be accommodating, to trust the men who present themselves as protectors, to sign the paperwork without causing a disruption. We are trained to value artificial peace over hard facts. But peace built on a lie is merely a delayed catastrophe. I learned that the most formidable weapon a person can wield does not involve raised voices, emotional outbursts, or frantic attempts at revenge. The greatest defense mechanism is unshakable, unwavering clarity. It is the cold, analytical refusal to accept an illusion. When a partner, a colleague, or a salesman slides a document across the table, tapping the bottom line with a heavy gold pen, telling you to just sign and stop asking questions, you must recognize the warning signs. That specific demand for blind trust is never a shield meant to protect you. It is a blindfold meant to keep you in the dark. That is exactly the moment you pick up the document, you turn on the bright light, and you start reading every single word. The morning mist sitting heavy over the Great Smoky Mountains carries a unique kind of silence. It is a profound, settling quiet that invites deep reflection. Sitting on my back porch, holding a warm ceramic mug of black coffee, I often find my thoughts drifting away from the forensic audits, the legal battles, and the dramatic unraveling of my marriage. Instead, my mind travels backward, far beyond the day Nathan handed me that manila envelope. I trace the fault lines of our disaster to their true origins. The collapse of my husband was not merely a sudden ethical failure of an ambitious corporate executive.
It was the inevitable harvest of a hollow upbringing. It was a tragedy of parenting.
In American culture, we are frequently sold a very specific, polished version of success. We are taught that a traditional family structure is meant to function as an incubator for upward mobility. Parents strive tirelessly to provide their children with the advantages they themselves lacked. We want to give them the best schools, the finest clothes, and a seamless path to the corner office. But in the frantic pursuit of providing a better life, we often forget to raise better people. Patricia, my former mother-in-law, viewed her son not as an independent soul to be guided, but as an extension of her own ego. She parented through a lens of entitlement and superficial optics. She shielded Nathan from the natural consequences of his actions, teaching him that accountability was an inconvenience meant for lesser people. When he made mistakes, she offered excuses. When he desired something he had not earned, she found a way to bend the rules to procure it for him. She believed that by insulating him from struggle and failure, she was demonstrating profound maternal love. What she actually did was construct a monster of pure, unadulterated narcissism. She raised a man equipped with the vocabulary of an adult, but possessing the emotional capacity of a toddler. Nathan never learned the foundational values of fairness or honesty, because his primary role model treated integrity as a negotiable commodity. He learned to view the people around him as utilities, existing solely to be leveraged for his own comfort. When Patricia found herself drowning in federal tax debt, she did not face the consequences of her financial recklessness. Instead, she allowed her son to cannibalize my life, my wages, and my family heritage to save her. She sacrificed her daughter-in-law on the altar of her own pride, and she had trained her son to strike the match. This realization fundamentally reshaped my understanding of family responsibility. True parental guidance is not about paving a frictionless road for the next generation. It is about equipping them with the moral compass required to navigate a world full of treacherous detours. I look at my own Mother Teresa, a woman who spent decades teaching primary school mathematics. She did not possess the financial resources to buy my way out of difficult situations. Instead, she offered something infinitely more valuable. She provided a rigid framework of accountability, layered with deep, unconditional support. She taught me that true gravity comes from knowing your own worth and standing firmly upon your own honest labor. She never permitted me to take credit for work I did not do, and she never allowed me to shift the blame for my own miscalculations. Growing up in a traditional household should ground a child in the unyielding principles of emotional awareness. It means teaching a son that a partner is a sovereign individual, not a stepping stone. It requires instilling the belief that true strength is found in vulnerability, in the courage to admit fault, and in the quiet dignity of doing the right thing when no one is watching to applaud you. Emotional intelligence is the most vital inheritance a parent can leave behind. A child who understands how to process their own shame, fear, and insecurity will never need to build an empire of lies to hide their flaws. Nathan lacked this emotional foundation entirely. When he faced the pressure of corporate expectations and his mother's impending ruin, he did not possess the internal fortitude to ask for help or admit defeat. His upbringing had left him hollow, so he filled the void with deception. He forged signatures, diverted funds, and orchestrated a bloodless coup against his own wife because he had been taught that winning at any cost was the only acceptable metric of a man's worth. We are currently witnessing a generational crossroads in how we define family success. If we continue to measure our parenting by the external achievements of our children, we risk raising a generation of beautifully packaged empty vessels. We must return to the quiet, difficult work of character building.
We must have the courage to let our children fail, to let them feel the sharp sting of disappointment, and to guide them through the uncomfortable process of making amends. Sharing these reflections is not merely about recounting a personal victory over a deceitful spouse. It is about examining the invisible threads that connect our childhood homes to the lives we eventually build. We all carry the echoes of our upbringing into our marriages, our careers, and our own parenting journeys. If these stories of accountability, resilience, and the pursuit of honest living resonate with the quiet truths you carry in your own heart, I invite you to join our growing community. Please subscribe and follow Thin Gang. Together, we can continue to explore the complex, beautiful, and sometimes painful realities of navigating life with open eyes and an unyielding spirit. As the morning sun finally burns away the last remaining patches of mist over the Smokies, I am left with a thought that fundamentally challenges the modern parenting paradigm. Conventional wisdom dictates that our ultimate duty as parents is to give our children everything we never had. We break our backs trying to ensure they never experience the sting of scarcity, the humiliation of a public failure, or the heavy burden of starting from the bottom. But perhaps that is the most dangerous lie we tell ourselves. Perhaps the cruelest thing you can ever do to a child is to give them an easy life. When you eliminate their struggles, you steal their opportunity to discover who they are when the safety net is gone. You deny them the necessary friction that turns raw potential into unshakable character. True love is not found in shielding a child from the fire. It is found in handing them a bucket of water, stepping back, and demanding they learn how to put out the flames themselves. Because one day, the fire will reach their own home, and if you have spent their entire life holding the hose, they will simply stand in the ashes and wonder why the world did not come to save them.